Hello and welcome to 3 hours of Django tutorials and instruction. This video is made up of 12 tutorials that build upon each other much like the chapters of a book. Throughout the lessons in this video, I will mention links being available in the description below. I've compiled all of these links into one GitHub resource that you will find in the description. Hi, I'm Dave Gray, and I'm the creator of these Django tutorials. You can subscribe to my YouTube channel for more tutorials like this one. You can also follow me on X, and if you're feeling generous and want some extras, you can even join my Patreon. Let's get started learning Django with Chapter 1. Today we're starting to learn Django, a Python web framework, and I'm starting at djangoproject.com. This is the homepage for the Django project, and it has great documentation. I'll provide a link to this in the course repository. So what is Django? Well, on the web page it says Django makes it easier to build better websites or web apps more quickly and with less code. It is a web framework, and after you learn the framework, that is definitely true. A framework abstracts some things that you would have to build otherwise, and so you can get started faster. But when you first learn a framework, it's a little more tedious because you have to learn how to use that framework, and that's what we'll do so in the future you can also build better web apps more quickly with Django. Let's scroll down just a little bit, and it says Meet Django. Here it says Django is a high-level Python web framework that encourages rapid development and clean, pragmatic design. It's built by experienced developers, so that will help us get started ridiculously fast with any project, as they say, because they've already mapped out a lot of this work for us. It's also secure, exceedingly scalable. It has lots of great features built in as well, and we'll get to some of those as we start learning Django. Now let's talk about prerequisites. If you haven't learned Python yet, that's a good place to start. This is not a Python for Beginners course, but Django is a Python framework for the web. So you should probably learn some of the basics of Python before starting this Django course. And I do have a Python for Beginners course on my YouTube channel. I'll be using Visual Studio Code as the code editor for this series, and you can get it at code.visualstudio.com if you don't have it, if you want to use it. Of course, you could use another code editor of your preference, but I will be using Visual Studio Code. Also, you're going to need Python, and so if you don't have that installed or just want to update the version you do have installed, you could download it and install it here from python.org. And you can see once we're here, there is a downloads page, and the current version is Python 3.12.1. I'm in VS Code now, and I've created a new folder. My folder is called Lesson 1. You could name yours whatever you want to as we start this series. And after you create a folder and open it in VS Code, go ahead and open a terminal window by pressing Control and the backtick. And now let's just verify the Python installation. Now I'm on Windows, so I'll type py. But if you are on Mac or Linux, you might be typing Python 3 to go ahead and execute Python. Either way, just so you know, I'm on Windows and I'll be typing py. Okay, after that, let's check our version by typing -- version. I'll press enter. You can see I have the latest as of the making of this video, Python 3.12.1. Now after this, we want to create a virtual environment. We're going to do that by typing Py or Python 3 if you need to on Mac or Linux, and then -m and then venv and then .venv. If you haven't seen this before, I do cover it in my Python for Beginners course. So after we've typed out this, let's go ahead and press enter. We should now see a folder over here in our file tree that is .venv. That would be our virtual environment, but we haven't started it yet. Now this is another difference between Mac and Linux. So not between Mac and Linux, pardon me, between Windows or Mac and Linux. So what I want to type on Windows is source space .venv/scripts/activate, and that would activate my virtual environment. But on Mac or Linux, instead of scripts, it is probably in bin/activate like that, just so you know the difference once again. So I'll type scripts/activate, press enter. This has now activated my virtual environment. So if I press enter again, you'll see the parentheses .venv here. So we know the virtual environment is activated. Now, anytime we want to deactivate that, we just type deactivate, if I could spell it correctly, deactivate, and press enter, and that would deactivate our virtual environment. But we're going to need it right now. As we install other things, we want to do that in the virtual environment for our project. So now let's install Django. Let's do that by typing py-m, then pip install, and then Django with a capital D, press enter, and this should install Django in our project virtual environment. Okay, and after it's finished, we also have a message here that says we could update pip from 23.2.1 to 23.3.2. So let's go ahead and do that. You may have a different message if this is in the future, but I'll type py-m install and pip install, pip install. Now capital U is the same as 2 dashes and the word upgrade, so I'll just do that. And then pip once again, press enter. That should update, and I should now have 23.3.2, which would be the latest. Now with everything up to date, let's verify our Django installation. So I'm going to type py, and that opens up the REPL here for Python. So now that we're using Python, I can just type import Django, and after that I can type print, then Django.get_version, and then parentheses, and then close out with another parentheses, press enter, and yes, we have Django version 5.0.1 as of the making of this video. Now I want to go ahead and quit the Python REPL, so I'll type quit. I am having a hard time typing today. Quit with parentheses, and now we're out of the REPL. We're still in our virtual environment. If I press enter, you can still see the virtual environment here with the parentheses. So now let's create our project with Django since we have Django installed. So I'm going to type Django-admin, then start project. Then we need to name our project, and I'll just call it my project and press enter. This is going to create our Django project for us. And now we see a my project folder in the file tree. After that, let's go ahead and open it, and we see another folder inside with the same name. That can be a little bit confusing, but that's actually what should happen. We also see a manage.py file or .py. We will be using that to issue commands. We won't change anything in it, but we will use it. Now inside of this My Project folder, we see several other files as well, and we will be working with some of those today. But since we've now installed Django and created a project, we can start the server and make sure that is working. So let's go ahead and do that. Here in the terminal window, once again, let's type py. Well, we need to go into this directory first, and remember we have 2 of these. So we want to go into the top directory. Right now I'm in my lesson 01 folder, so I'm going to CD to go into the My Project folder. Now I'm inside of that top level My Project folder. From here, I want to type py, and then I'm going to type manage.py, and now I'll issue my command, which will be run server, and we can specify the port. The default port is 8000, but if I wanted it on 8001, I would just type the port number afterwards. But we could just let it go to the default, which will be 8000. So I'm going to press enter. It will start the server. Now we do have a message here about unapplied migrations, and you will probably see that too. We won't be doing that today, but just so you know, that's nothing wrong. It just means we haven't got there yet, and we will cover that. Right now the server is running, and we can see it's running at HTTP 127.0.0.1, which is the same as localhost. That means your computer, and then at port 8000. So let's go to the browser. We're back in the browser. Let's open a new tab, and after we do that, let's open up localhost, and let's go to 8000, press enter, and you should have the install worked successfully. Congratulations from Django with the little rocket here, just like I do. That's our server, and it's serving a default page, and it says you're seeing this page because debug equals true is in your settings file, and you have not configured any URLs yet, but we will be configuring our own URLs. This is just what you see from the initial installation. Now we're back in VS Code, and in the file tree, you should also notice that you now have a PyCache directory over here, and that's nothing to worry about. That just gets added, and also this db.sqlite3 file. Those were added since we've created our project and started the server. And nothing to worry about. Once again, we will eventually get to those. The Pi cache actually just helps serve some things for our project faster, but it's nothing we need to be concerned about. Now let's stop our server. I'm going to click over here in the terminal and press Control-C, and that stops the server. From there, I want to go ahead and click on the urls.py file that we have here inside of the My Project folder, and we'll scroll down to where we see the URL patterns here. So we have a list, and inside of it, we see one pattern already that has path with the admin / and then admin.site.urls. We're going to add to this. Let's start by adding a path for the home page. And so this will start out with path. And now we'll just have an empty string here. So 2 single quotes and then a comma. Now we're not going to put the next half yet, but we will. We will create a view for that. But right now, let's just put a comma and move on to the next one. So I'll put another path, and I want to put in an about page route. So it will be about / a lot like we see for the admin with the /. And I'll put a comma there as well. And then let's go ahead and put a comma afterwards also. So with that much there, let's go ahead and save the file. We will come back to this to finish it. But now we need to create a views file. So in the same directory here where we have our urls.py, let's create a new file. Let's name this views.py. Now inside of this, we're going to have an import. So we'll say from Django.http, we will import the HTTP response. Now, after we import that, we can create a function for our route. So we'll name this one homepage because it's going to our homepage. It's going to receive a request for the homepage. Now, this is a function, so then underneath we're indented. And here we're going to, let's not comment that out. We'll return and we'll have HTTP response. Now I'm going to respond with something very similar here, like hello world. That's kind of to be expected in a intro tutorial, right? After we say hello world, let's go ahead and add something else like I'm home. That works. So that's just a simple HTTP response to a request for the home page. And that's what we should see when we go to our home page once we hook all of this together. Let's put in another one for about. So we'll request the about page. Now these don't have to be named homepage or about, but it just kind of makes sense to match them up to what we are actually providing that is requested as well. So we'll link all of this together in the next page here in just a second. But right now we'll say def about for our function, and then I'm going to return once again an HTTP response. Now here I'm going to say my about page. Just keep it simple. So we have our 2 responses when we expect to get the home page or the about page requested. So now let's go back to the URLs page and we can link all of this together. And we're going to do that once again with an import. We need to import those views first. So I'll say from dot, which means the folder that we are in, will then import views that we just created. Now that we have those views imported, we can use those with the paths here. So I'm going to say views.homepage, and that links to that homepage function that we created right here. Now after that, let's go to the about, and here I'm going to say views.about. And so now we've linked those functions to our routes here in our URL patterns. So when we get a request for the homepage, it will call that function for the home page. And when we get a request for the about page, it will call that function for the about page. So now let's once again open a terminal window with control in the backtick. And from here, let's start our server. I'll arrow up so we can see the same command. It's pi. Then we call the manage.py file that we have over here. And then we call the command from it, run server. And again, you could choose a different port by specifying it like 8001. I'll once again go to the default, which is 8000. So after I enter this, we once again see this warning that you can ignore about migrating. And then it says it's running at port 8000. And again, that's at localhost. Let's go to our browser and check this out. Now, currently, we still have the page that we saw before, so we need to refresh this to see the new page. Refresh, and we get a very small "Hello World, I'm Home." I can zoom this in this a lot bigger here. I'm at 500% now, and you can read that very well. Let's go ahead and check out the About page while we're here. So 8000/About, press enter, and we get my About page. Now these are pretty boring, and I really had to zoom them in. So we want to go ahead and do more than just send a couple of text messages like we currently did with the HTTP response. Let's create some HTML templates and make this look just a little bit better for our first lesson. Okay, back in VS Code, we need to create a templates directory now so we can have some HTML templates instead of just sending text. So what I want to do is go to the file tree. I'm going to click the manage.py file just so I know I'm on that same level. And here I'm going to click a new directory icon, and now I'll type templates. So if we close this enter my project directory, we should see templates directly underneath that. Now here I want to create a couple of HTML files. I'm going to create home.html, and here I'll type an exclamation mark, which is an image shortcut, and I'll press tab. That gives me a quick skeleton of an HTML page, and that's all I need right now. I'm going to switch the name document in the title home. Inside of the body, I'm going to put an H1 and put the word home in there as well. Then I'm going to have a paragraph that says, check out my About page. But I'm going to change the word about here to a hyperlink. So I need the anchor tag with an href. Inside of here, I'll put a slash and then about. Close that out and put the word about. So that links to our About page. Control S to save that file. Now Control A to select everything in the file, Control C to copy everything. Now I'm going to just create another new HTML file here, call it about.html, and I'm going to Control V to paste all of that in. I'll double click home, and then I'm going to press Control D to select the next instance of home. I'm going to change that word to about. Now in the link here in our anchor tag, the word about needs to be deleted because we're just going to go to the slash, which is our root or home page, if you will. And we'll change the word about to home, so it says, check out my home page. Control S to save that file, and we're finished with the HTML files. Now let's open the second My Project folder. Look inside of here to the settings.py file. We need to scroll down. If you start at the top here, to scroll all the way down to where it says templates. Then inside of this list for templates, we need to go to where it says DIRs, in all caps, stands for directory. This is us telling Django where our templates are. So we put in single quotes. I'm going to type the word templates here that refers to our templates directory. Control S to save that change, and that's the only change we need for the settings.py file right now. After that, let's go back to the views.py file. Now I'm going to comment out some of the code here. I want to leave it in here because we used it earlier in the tutorial, and others may of course download the code and need to see these lines as well. So I'm just going to use the hashtag to comment out that import and both return lines here. We're going to change these, but I want to leave this in just to refer to earlier in the tutorial. So now the import we need starts with from, then we'll have Django.shortcuts. After that, we'll say import render. And then we're going to return render on each of these lines. So I'll start a new line here, and I didn't need that quote either. Let's come down, return render. The first thing we pass into render is the request. After the request, we're going to render our HTML template. So here I'll say home.html. We don't need to do anything else. Django now knows where this template is because we linked it in the settings. I'm going to copy this line for the return render, Control C, come down here into our about function, paste it, once again change home to about. So now I'm referring to that about template. Go ahead and Control S to save this. Let's open a terminal once again with Control and the backtick. I still have it running right now, but just to make sure, let's Control C to quit, and then let's go ahead and restart it with py, manage.py, run server. I'll press enter. Now we know it's restarted, And let's bring the browser up to see if we can see our changes. Right now, we still have the old page here that says My About page. We can hit back. We still have the old Hello World, I'm Home. But let's refresh and see if we get the changes. Yes, we do. So we now have an H1 Check Out My About page. And it looks like it links to the About page. Let's click that. It does. We're now on the About page, and it has a link to the home page. So our HTML templates are working as expected. Back in VS Code, let's go ahead and Control-C to stop the server, close the terminal, and now we want to create a static folder for some CSS and JavaScript, some static assets for our project. So to do that, we want it on the same level as this templates directory. To make sure you're on that same level, you could click the manage.py file here in the file tree if you want to. From there, I'm going to click New Folder. Once again, here I'm going to call this folder Static because they are static assets that will go inside. Then I'm going to create a new directory inside of Static. I'm going to call it CSS. Now, inside of CSS, I'll create a file, call this style.css. Now, I hope you're familiar with CSS. If you're not, I do have a CSS course on my YouTube channel as well. Here, I'm going to start with a simple reset. We're not going to add a lot of styles here, but I'll reset as I usually do. So margin and padding, both at 0. After that, box sizing to border box. That is my simple reset. After that, let's make a change to the body so we definitely know the CSS is taking hold. We'll do a min height here of 100 VH. After that, let's set the display to grid, and then we're going to place content center, so everything will be in the center of the page. Set the font size to 3 rem, so it's big but not too big. Background color, let's switch these around, so let's go with black, and then let's set the color, the text, to white smoke. After that, we'll just change our H1 and paragraph just a little bit, so both of those, and let's say text align is going to be center. That's all the CSS we need, and we can apply this to both of our HTML templates. And to do that, we need to go to the settings.py file again, that is inside of that second My Project folder. At the very top of the file, we need to add one import, and that is import OS. After we make that import, we'll scroll down to almost the bottom of the file now. We can see we have a static URL here, but we need to add something underneath this. So here in all caps, we'll say static files underscore dirs. From there, we'll put in an equals and we'll create a list. Now let's refer to that import. So os.path.join. Then inside of here, we'll refer to the base directory that's already defined above in this file for us. And then we'll say static, and this is referring to the static directory that we created over here. So we're telling Django where this folder is for our static assets. So let's go ahead and Control S to save those changes again to the settings file. And now we need to go back to our HTML templates and add our style sheet in, and we can do that with the Django templating engine. It's very cool how it works. So I'll show you in the home page. And we'll go right underneath the doc type definition here, and let's put in a curly brace and then a %, say load, and then space static, another space, and another %, and then the closing curly brace. So we have loaded in static asset now, and now we can use that, and we're going to use that when we link to the CSS, and that is a link element. I can scroll down or arrow down here and say link CSS. I get some auto completion that says it's a style sheet. It's already linking to style.css, but that's not what I want to do here in Django. I need to link specifically to the file that I have told Django that we have. And so I'm going to use that templating engine, again, a curly bracket, opening and closing, and then a %, and then the word static. And then in single quotes here, I'll say CSS/style.css. So now I've used the templating engine, but I need to put in that closing % as well. So this is what it looks like when we're using the templating engine. We're starting with these curly brackets and of course having the % signs as well. This should link our style sheet to this page. So let's check this out. We'll need to again open the terminal, start the server. After we start the server, let's go back, take a look at our home page. Let's refresh and see if the changes apply. Yes, they do. So we have the big home and it says check out my about page. We haven't applied the CSS to the about page yet. So when we go there, it still is without those styles. So I'm going to apply that in the GitHub repository for this lesson, but I'll leave this one for you to apply because it's just the same thing we did to the home page. And once again, back in VS Code, let's link some JavaScript as well so you can see it works the same way. I'm going to click on the static directory. I'm going to click to create a new directory, make this one JS. Now inside of the JS directory, I'll create a new file and this will just be main.js. Inside of here, I'll just put a console.log and say, this is JS from your about page. And we should see this message in the console if we link the JavaScript correctly to the about page. So now in the about.html, and this is where you're going to link the style sheet, and you can check my repository to see if you did it the same way that I did. But now we need to link the JavaScript as well. So again, at the top, which you would need for the CSS anyway, we're going to start with load static, and we're using that templating engine, so we have the curly brackets and the percentages. Now after the title here, I'm going to put a script tag. So I typed script, and I'm just going to choose the source here from the list so we could specify a source. This is where we'll use that templating engine. But I also want to point out we should put defer right here as an extra attribute for the script tag. So this will wait until all of the page is loaded and then it loads the script, is what defer essentially does. Now here we'll put in the curly bracket, percent, say static, just like we did before, and now our link. So js/main.js. Again, the closing percent there as well. So let's save this change. I left the server running. Let's see if it applies our changes when we go back to about, reload the page. Now I'll press Control, Shift, and the letter I to open up our dev tools over here and see the console, and we have our console message. This is JS from your about page. Hey guys, I hope you're enjoying the video. You may be surprised to learn that 3 out of every 4 viewers, nearly 75% of all people who watch my channel, aren't subscribed. So I just wanted to take a quick second and remind you to hit that subscribe button. It really helps me out. And if you really like my videos, you can get exclusive content and support my channel even more by joining my Patreon at patreon.com/Dave Gray. Thanks for your consideration, and now back to the video. I've got VS Code open and we are in lesson 2, and the source code for today's tutorial starts where the previous lesson ended. And there's a link in the description that provides the code for each lesson. Let's start by opening up our terminal with Control and the backtick in VS Code. And now let's go ahead and start our virtual environment. I'm going to type source, and then I'm on Windows, so I type .venv/scripts. If you're on Mac or Linux, you would want to type bin instead of scripts. After that, let's type / and then activate. Press enter. It should start the virtual environment. And if you press enter again, you should see that .venv in parentheses as well. Now after this, we need to cd into our my project directory. So cd and then just my project at the command line. Press enter. Now we're in that my project directory. I'm going to go ahead and close the terminal window. After that, before we get started on anything else, I want to highlight a VS Code extension that you should probably add. So I'm going to click the extensions icon over here. After that, I'm going to type Django, and it will bring up the Django VS Code extension. Once you go ahead and install this, you can see I already have it installed. Once you install this, then it will identify some of the files in your Django project and of course have the color coding that you expect to see in your code in Visual Studio Code. Now if we combine this with another extension that I use, VS Code-icons, then you'll see some of the icons that you see in my file tree. So you might want to use this extension as well, and your files will have the same little icons in the file tree that mine do. I'll close this out, go back to the file tree. Let me open up the My Project directory over here, and we see some files, like our manage.py file that we have over here has the Python icon next to it. You'll see things like that when you use the VS Code icons extension. So today we want to talk about apps in Django. Now, previously we created a Django project. Now we're going to create a Django app. Apps should be modular. In other words, we might have different parts of a larger project broken into apps or applications, if you will. So today we're going to create an app for posts, but we might also have an app for users or anything else like tasks or shopping cart. Anything you would have in a larger project, you can break out into those separate features, and they're modular. So what I mean by modular is you might be able to take one of those apps from a Django project and put it in a different Django project. So you're breaking those out into separate logic, separate files, separate functions that should work independently. Let's create our new app. Once again, open the terminal window with Control in the backtick. From there, I'm going to type Py. You might type Python instead of Py if you are on Mac or Linux. From there, I want manage.py, so we're going to call something from that manage.py file. After that, I want start app, all one word, and then we need to name it. I'm going to name this app posts and press enter. This should create a new app in our Django project. And if we look over here, I'll close the terminal again, we now have a posts directory inside of the top level My Project directory. So let's open this up. We can see inside files have already been created, including a views file, which we had to create in the last lesson. Now it's already here for us. So let's look at the views file. I'll click on it in the file tree. We can see the import is already at the top from Django Shortcuts Import Render. We also had to do that in the last lesson. Now it's already here for us. So let's create a function. I'm going to say def, and I'm going to call this posts_list. And of course, it's going to receive a request. And from there, down below, we'll say return render. And then the first thing you always put in render is the request. After that, we don't have what we need to put here next. I'll just put the single quotes, and we'll come back and put in what we're going to put as far as what is rendered in return. So now before we go any further, we need to tell our Python project about the new app that we added to the project. So to do that, we need to go to the settings file that we were in the previous lesson. You remember that's inside of the My Project directory that we have over here that is inside of the top level My Project directory. So let's open this up, click settings. Now we're in the settings.py file, and let's scroll down to installed apps. And at the bottom of the list, let's just add posts in single quotes and save the file. So now we have told the app, or we've told the project, if you will, about our new app called posts. So we can close the settings file. Now inside of our new post directory, let's go ahead and create another new directory, and let's name this one templates. So we already had a templates directory at the top level that we created in the last lesson, but this directory for templates is specific to our posts app. Now inside of this templates directory, let's create another directory named posts. So now this is specifically templates for posts that we have inside of our post app. We're creating a name space, if you will. We're naming this specifically for posts so it's easy to identify in our code. Now after that, let's go ahead and add a new file inside of the post directory. And notice the little DJ over here for Django. It assumes right away that I'm going to create an HTML template, and this is how it identifies it, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. Let's call this posts_list.html. Now I want to type an image shortcut here with an exclamation mark to get the skeleton for our page, just like we did for the HTML pages in the last lesson. But notice my image shortcut is not working. Let's fix this for our now Django HTML files as identified by that Django extension we installed. So to do that, I'm going to delete this exclamation mark temporarily. Let's press Control, comma to open the settings in VS Code. From here, let's type emmet. That's E-M-M-E-T. Now, once we get to the emmet settings, let's scroll down until we see emmet include languages. This is what we need. Let's click Add Item. Here, let's type Django-HTML, and then tab over, and for value, put in HTML. Now we'll click OK, and we should be good to go. Let's close the settings. Now inside of our new posts_list.html file, I can type an exclamation mark, and we get the emit auto completion once again. So I'll press Tab. That gives us the skeleton for our HTML page. And now I'm just going to change document here in the title to posts list, and I want just a capital L there. After that, I'll put an H1 here in the body, and I'll put posts list inside of that as well. Control S to save, and we're finished with our post list template for now. Now you may have noticed there's one file that's missing inside of our new posts app, and that is the urls.py. We have one that we previously looked at inside of the My Project directory, so let's click that again to look at it. And of course it's got comments up here that were originally created by Django when we created our project. Let's copy all of this, except this from django.contrib import admin. We don't need that. So let's copy this from line 18 all the way down to 25, then Control C. I guess I should say highlight from 18 to 25, then copy with Control C. Now let's go back to our post directory over here. We can click on views once again, but now we want a new file. So I'll click the new file icon. I want urls.py. Let's just paste into this urls.py file. And from here, we can go ahead and delete that admin line. So we'll remove that. Let's go ahead and remove the about line as well, because we're just going to use this line that has, I need to close out that list once again with a bracket, but we're just going to have this path that goes to this empty string, just like we went to the home page, except now we're already in the posts path. So we don't need to say posts here once again. That's already understood as far as Django is concerned. So we're going to go to views, and then we'll have our dot, and then we'll say posts list. And this will know where to go, because in the previous lesson in the settings, we already told it we were going to look for templates in the templates directory. And that didn't apply to just that first templates directory we created. It applies to all of the templates directories throughout the whole project. So it knows to look in our new templates directory for this post list template as well. Now remember, we never completed the views file. So let's go back to views.py, and this is where we'll specify posts a little bit more directly like you would think. So we've got the request, and now we need to say posts/post_list.html. Oh, and my bad here, this should also be posts list. It's be posts/posts_list. Neither one is missing an S at the end. So let's save that file, and now in our new app, we have created our post list template, and of course put that inside of a templates directory. And once we're in the templates directory, we're telling Django to look in the post directory and then for the post list template. But then we also created the URLs file, and it has the pattern here for our post list that is our view. Now from there, we need to go back and register our URLs that we create in this new urls.py file inside of the main URLs file that we had from the previous lesson over here. So to do that now, we need one more import. So besides path coming from Django URLs, we need to put a comma there and also import include. And now we can use include in the path we're about to create below. So let's start that as well. I'll enter and then say path, and then we're going to go to posts slash, and then of course single quote comma, and then we'll have include, and now we're going to have posts.urls, if I could spell URLs correctly. Oh, and thank goodness VS Code is telling me I've got an error here because I didn't put single quotes around posts.urls, and it does need to be inside of those quotes. So now what we're telling Django is that we want to look inside of our posts app and look at the URLs file inside of that posts application that we've created inside of our project. Okay, let's save that file with Control S, and after that we're ready to start our server. So Control and the backtick to once again open up a terminal window. From here we want to type py manage.py and then run server. Press enter. And from here, of course, we get the migration warning again, like we did in the previous tutorial. We will get there. We just haven't covered that yet. Don't worry about that. We can press Control and click on the 127.0.0.1 :8000, which is the port The 127.0.0.1 is the same as typing in localhost, which you could also do, but I'm going to control click here to launch this in the browser, and I'll open the browser so we can see it. Here is our home page that we had from the last lesson as well, and that means our server is running and it's serving this web page at the localhost port 8000 up above here. So from there we can click the About page and we also see that. But we can also change the word About now to Posts, and we should see our post list template, and we do. Now notice we didn't apply any CSS to our post list template yet, and there are other things we can do. Now we briefly learned about applying static files like CSS and JavaScript in the previous lesson, so now we actually used templates to do that. But now let's learn a little bit more about templates, and you can see how powerful they are as we apply a nav bar and some different styles to all three of these pages. We're back in VS Code. The first thing I'm going to do is scroll down and go to our static directory, open up the CSS directory, click the style.css page. We didn't have a whole lot in here, and we won't have much more in here after this lesson, but I am going to change it a little. Just going to select it all and paste in my new CSS, where you can see I've added just a little bit more. I've got some here for the nav element that we're going to add. I've also got a main element now, and then I've got a little bit of styling for a link. And you can get all of this from the code repository for this lesson. I'm not going to go over the individual CSS here. But now if I go to our top level templates directory that we have in our project, we still have the home and about pages. Let's click on home here and let's change a few things. As a matter of fact, we could change quite a bit. And before I do that, I should actually create the template we're going to use for all of the pages. So let me do that before we change anything in home. Let's create a new file and we'll call this layout.html. Now inside the layout, I want a skeleton again. So I'll type the exclamation mark for Emmet and get a page skeleton. But now we need to put in some blocks. And if you remember from the previous lesson, because we did this to load the CSS and JavaScript, we start at the top here underneath the doc type definition, and we'll have curly brackets and a percentage sign, and then I'm going to say load static, and of course that closes out with another percent and curly bracket. So now that we're loading these static assets, we could link to those, and let's just grab that out of the home file here so I don't have to retype. Now we only had the CSS in the home. Let's go to About, and now we'll grab the link. For the style sheet, we'll also grab the script tag, Control-C to copy those. Come back here to the layout, and I'll just put them underneath the title. So now we have the link, and it will be completed with the CSS style sheet. We have the script, and it will be completed with the main.js file. I'm going to change this document title, though. So let's press Enter here so we have the opening title and then the closing title tag. And now we need to define a block. So this will start with curly brackets again, percentage signs, and then I'll say block, and I'm going to call this block the title. Now we also need to say where we're closing or ending the block. So I'll put another curly bracket, percent, and we'll say end block. Now in between, we could put in what we want to have here, but it will be replaced from our other templates when we have something. So I'll show how that works, but I'll start out with just what I want as default if nothing replaces this block. So I'll put in Django app, and that's just a generic, but if I don't provide a title in any of the other pages, that's what will be here. And now let's scroll down to the page, and we're going to have two sections here, a nav, and then besides the nav, we're also going to have a main section. So inside of the main section, let's create a block here. Let's call this content. Then we'll of course end that block as well. And we don't have to put in anything for a default, so I could just leave this empty, and that's what I'll do here. So we'll end that block as well, but content can be added there to this template now that we've labeled it as content. And now for the nav, I'm just going to create something here that won't be added specifically by any template. This will just be a nav bar that gets added to every page. So I'm going to say a href, set this equal to /, so this would be the home, and let me do the Windows key and period. I'm not sure what it is on Mac off the top of my head, but I can type home And it brings up the icons here. I've got the icon I want. I can close this out. Now let's put a little pipe symbol here to separate these as well. And we'll come to the next line. I'm just going to highlight this first one now. Shift Alt and the down arrow. And now I've got 3 separate ones, so we can change these. The next one is going to about. Let's change this to, again, Windows key, and I'm going to do happy face. And finally, let's change this one to a newspaper look, for it would be our posts. So I'll say news. There we go. And of course, I want to get rid of that last pipe. So now I have 3 links that go to the nav bar, and they're all just little emoji links. And with that, I've completed a simple layout template for this application. So now let's go back to the other pages. And I said application. Actually, there could be several apps or applications in a Django project. So this is the top level. So I've created a simple layout for the project pages. So now let me go to the home.html, and now we can make some changes here. I'm going to highlight the H1 and the paragraph here that we have inside of the body. And I'll just Control-C to copy those. And then I'm going to select everything else and just hit backspace to remove it. Now I want to start out at the top with extends, and then I need to put single quotes, and I'll say my layout.html and another single quote. So I'm extending that template that we created, the layout.html. And now in this page, I'm going to replace some of the content that we created in blocks inside of layout.html. So now I'm going to say block title, and I'll put what I want to replace the Django app with. And here I'm just going to say home. Then after that, press enter. We need to close out this block as well. So once again, end block. After that, let's create our content. So now we'll have block content. And under there, I'm going to paste in what I had copied before. So I've got the H1 and the paragraph element. And then down below, I'm going to say end block as well. And that's now all we need for our home page, because we are adding content where we had the blocks in the layout.html file. And then it uses that template because it extended the layout.html. So now I'm going to do Control-A to copy everything we added to our home.html, and Control-C to copy, actually Control-A to select. Go to the about.html again, and I'm going to just click above everything we currently have in there and paste in the new information we created for home. Now, if I scroll down, I'm going to take the about in the H1 and the paragraph and copy those and replace the content we had above. Then I'm also going to change home up here in the title to about. Now I can delete everything we previously had in this file, and we should be finished with our about page. Although I do kind of want to format this with an indent. I just think it looks better overall. And now let's Control-A to highlight all of this again, Control-C to copy, and one more page. Let's go to our posts list that we have inside of our posts app we created, and then the templates directory, post list, and let's do this one more time. So I'll paste this in above, then I'll just change the about to posts list, and below I'm going to get rid of the paragraph altogether because we don't need it there. And then we should just have posts list and an H1 on the page, and I'll delete everything that was previously in the page. So this would be our posts list now, and we're using that layout template once again. Okay, let's open the terminal window with Control and the backtick. We have the server running, but just to make sure we get the new information, let's Control-C to close it. We can arrow back up to get that run server command, press enter, should start the server once again. Now let's go to the browser, and here's the about page that we are on. I'm going to hold down the shift key and refresh to hopefully get the new page, and that's what we get. So look, we now have our nav bar across the top with the 3 different icons to navigate. We could also go back to the home page with the link we have here. You can see I did change the styles a little bit. Let's go to the post page, and when I click there, it says home. So I've got something routed wrong or something I changed. Let me go back and look in VS Code, and it could be simply in that nav bar layout. And yes, I didn't add posts here inside of that template. So let's see if this picks this up or if I need to do a complete restart of the server. Well, let's go back to Chrome, and I'm going to hold down the Shift key and refresh once again. Hopefully now this would go to post. Yes, I can see it's going to. So there is our post list. Here is our about page, and here's our home page. And the links on these pages, the about and home, should also work. So now you can see the power of templates, and we're going to use those a lot more as we set up our data, and then we pull that data into templates, and that creates some very powerful pages where we can bring in all of that data, use one template, but yet generate, say, many post pages or many user profiles or different things like that, all to come in future lessons. The source code for today's tutorial starts where the previous lesson ended, and there's a link in the description that provides the code for each lesson. I've got VS Code open. You can see I've got a lesson 3 folder over here now, and let's go ahead and open a terminal window, and like we do at the beginning of every lesson, let's go ahead and start our virtual environment. So I'll type source, then .venv/scripts. This would be a lowercase bin if you're on Mac or Linux, and after that I want activate. I'll press enter, and now you can see the .venv in parentheses. So let's go ahead and cd into my project. So now we're in the directory that we need to be in. I'm going to close the terminal for now. Let's open the my project directory here in the file tree, and then from there let's open the post directory, and let's go to the models.py file. Now we can create models with our Python code. They model data. And each type of data is going to have a table in the database. And what happens when we create the Python code, and they're classes, by the way, the models, then they get migrated and become tables in the database. So the migration takes our Python code and turns it into a database table. So for example, we might have users and we'll have posts. And so those would be 2 separate tables in our database. So we need to start out by creating our model in Python, and we're in the models.py file right now. Let's start on line 4 in our models.py file, and I'll type class post, and then we pass in models.model with a capital M, that's important, and then a colon. After that, we start to define our model, and so here's what we want in our post model. We want a title field, we want a body field, and then let's have a slug field. Now, a slug would be the defining part of the URL or the post. So we might have rdomain.com/posts/ and then you would see the slug. That is typically how we refer to that. It's part of the URL and it identifies the post or article, if you will. Then a date as to when it was created. Now we need to set all of these equal to something. So let's go ahead and set the title equal to models.character field. And now this character field is going to accept a max_length. Let's set that equal to 75 characters. Now let's quickly look at the Django docs. In the Django docs, you can see that we've got a model field reference title here. So this page is going to show all the different field types that we can have. And as I scroll down, first it has field options here under the field reference that we see on the right. But then as I scroll down, we'll find the field types. And you can see that I use the character field. So let me click on that and we'll get the details. And here you can see the details of this character field, and it accepts a max length. So anytime you need a field, and you can explore this page, I'll link to it in the description, you can look up the different types available to you. And of course, you can use that dot notation in VS Code to pull up the menu and look at any name that ends with the word field as well, as it should be in this list. Okay, we're back in VS Code. Now let's set the body equal, not minus, but equal to models.text field. And put parentheses. We won't pass anything in there. Now there is a difference between the character field and the text field, and you could look this up in the docs, but the text field is going to relate to a text area form input, which is different. And that's something else about the fields that we choose here. They relate to form inputs when we go ahead and look at these in our website. So that's important as well. We're not just defining our database, we're also thinking about how we're going to accept that data in a form. Now slug is going to equal models.slug field, and we won't pass anything into it either. But then date is going to equal models.datetime field, and here we do pass something in. I need auto_now_add, equals true. And that means a timestamp is going to be added, or a date timestamp, every time the user adds another post. So all the user needs to provide is the title, body, and slug, and the database will automatically add the date timestamp to go along with that. So now we've completed our model. Let's save the file. Let's go ahead and open up a terminal window with control in the backtick. And from here, like we've done in previous lessons, let's start the server. So I'm going to type py. If you're on Mac or Linux, you want to type Python, then manage.py, and then run server. When I enter, we'll see that same error/warning message that we've seen in previous lessons that says you have 18 unapplied migrations. And so that is because Django comes with some of its own built-in models as well, and we need to apply those migrations also. So let's do that first. I'll press Control-C to get back out of the server. And now to go ahead and apply these migrations, we need to type py, and I'm on the wrong keys again, py, there we go, manage.py, and then migrate. And now let's press Enter. Once we do that, you can see it applied all of those migrations from the built-in models that Django provided. But this did not apply our post migration. We need to make that migration first before it can be applied. So let's once again type py, then manage.py, and then we type make migrations, all one word, no space there, and press Enter. And you'll see that it creates a migration for our post model that we created, and it tells us where this migration is, and we can look at that in just a moment. But it's posts/migrations, and then it has a number, 001, because Django is going to keep track of these migrations. Then when we create another one, let's say we change something about our post model, we would need to make another migration at that point. When we do that, it's going to compare the migrations. It's going to know what it's already created in the database, and it's only going to take the actions that it needs to based on reconciling what has already happened with the changes we have made. So now that we've created this migration, we can also apply it. But before we apply it, let me close the terminal and let's look at it. We've got the migrations folder over here. Here is the migration file. And you can see inside the file, it wants to create this model, the database. So if we create a migration in the future, it's not going to create the model again. It will have already done so. But this first time, it needs to do that. And we can see the different fields that we added as well. So that's the migration. Let's go ahead now, apply it to the database by sending that migrate command. So we'll say py manage.py, and then just type migrate, press Enter. And now we get the messages back that it has applied the migrations. It says applying post.0001_initial and OK. So now that is available in our database. The source code for today's tutorial starts where the previous lesson ended, and there's a link in the description that provides the code for each lesson. We've got VS Code open. Let's go ahead and open a terminal window once again, and let's start our virtual environment with source. Now we want to type .venv/scripts, bin if you're on Mac or Linux. After that, activate, we'll press Enter, and that should start our virtual environment. I can press Enter again to make sure we have the .venv in parentheses, and we do. With that said, let's go ahead and talk about the topic for today, but we're not going to close the terminal window right away. So the topic is the Django ORM, and it's a little easier to explore that ORM in the shell, and we're going to do that in the terminal, which is why I leave that open. But also, what is an ORM? It's object relational mapping. It's kind of the intermediary between our Python code and our database. So we can execute something in our Python code, and then it goes ahead and carries out that action on the database. So we have mapped what we are doing from our model to our actual database, and that ORM kind of carries out the commands between the two. So now let's go ahead and get started with that. I'm going to do that by typing Python if you're on Mac or Linux. After that, manage.py, and then shell, and press Enter. And I got ahead of myself. We need to actually cd into the My Project folder first, and I should do that at the beginning of every lesson right after starting the environment. So now we're in the My Project folder. I'm going to arrow up and see if I can do that manage.py shell once again. Now we have the interactive console like we expect. And so to work with our post model in this interactive console shell, we actually need to import that as well. So we can say from, and then we'll say posts.models, and I need to type models correctly, and then we will import post with a capital P, which is our post model. And once we've imported that, we can create a new instance. So I'm going to say P equals post and put the parentheses after that and then press enter. So now we have a new instance of our post model. So if I type P, see what we get back. It says it is a post object. The none means we haven't saved any post yet to our database. So there is no post model, no post object at this point based on the post model saved in our database. So that's all that the none means. So from here, let's go ahead and assign a title. So we'll say p.title equals my first post with an exclamation mark, and then in that with a quote, and press enter. So now we have applied that title. And now we should save this to our database. So we'll just say p.save and put parentheses once again, and I'll press enter. And now that is saved to the database. So you can see how easy working with the ORM is in Django. And now that we've saved that, let's retrieve all the posts that we have in our database, which at this point it's only one, but we can confirm that by typing post.objects.all and parentheses. I'll press enter, and it returns a query set back. And you can see it says we have one post object now in our database. Instead of none, we have a 1 in the parentheses here. But that post object is kind of generic, and if we had more posts in there, it would be nice to be able to tell the difference between the posts as well. So we can do that. First, we need to exit this interactive shell though. So I'll type exit and parentheses. Now that we've exited the shell, let's go ahead and close the terminal window. Let's open my project over here in the file tree. From there, let's go into the post directory where we created our posts app, and let's go to the models.py file. Now we want to add a method to our post class. Now a method is like a function, except it's part of a class. So underneath, and we'll make sure we're indented so it applies to this post class. Let's go ahead and start, and I'll type def, and then a space, 2 underscores, str, and you can see Visual Studio Code wants to help us, so I can just press tab, and it's going to apply most of what we need. So we've got 2 underscores, str, 2 underscores, parentheses, the word self, and then a colon, return self dot, and they put name here, but what we really need is self dot title based on our model above. So now we want to return the title instead of just a generic phrase post object. So let's save this change to our model. Now this isn't changing the data in our model, so we don't need to create another migration and send this to the database. This is just a method here that we can call on the model. So no migration is necessary. So now let's open up a terminal window once again, and we need to start back where we were from the beginning as far as the shell is concerned. So here I'm going to type py manage.py shell to get back into that interactive shell. And now I need to import the post model again. So I'll say from posts.models, and then we'll say import and post with a capital P. So now we've imported the post model once again. Let's create another new instance. So I'll say P equals post and parentheses. So that's a new instance. Let's create a second post title here. So I'll say this is my second post. After we've done that, let's save this post as well. So now we should have 2 posts in our database. Let's go ahead and check that by using the post model and then saying objects.all and parentheses afterwards. I'll press enter. And now when we get that query set in return, you can see instead of saying post object, it says post my first post and post my second post based on those titles that are inside of our posts. So you've learned a little bit about interacting with the ORM that is built into Django. Now in the next lesson, we're going to work with the Django admin where we can add more posts, and you'll see how all of this can work inside of our web app. But for now, don't forget to exit this interactive model by typing exit with parentheses and pressing enter. The source code for today's tutorial starts where the previous lesson ended, and there's a link in the description that provides the code for each lesson. I've got VS Code open. Let's go ahead and open a terminal window with Control and the backtick. From there, let's start our virtual environment, and I'm going to do that by typing source and then .venv/scripts, once again bin if you're on Mac or Linux, and after that we want activate. Go ahead and press enter. We can press enter one more time to verify that we have the .venv in parentheses, and now we're ready to cd into the My Project that we have created. Today we're talking about the Django admin feature, and it provides some features actually that we would have to build otherwise, and they're very useful features. So let's check all of that out, and we'll start by closing the terminal window. Then let's open the My Project folder, and then inside of the My Project folder we had another My Project folder. Let's open that up and then go down to the views, and not the views, I'm sorry, the urls.py. And once we're in there, let's scroll down and let's look at the URL patterns. Remember, this admin path was already in here for us. We're going to use this today, so I just wanted to draw your attention to it's already in here, so we don't need to add anything extra for it. Now let's go ahead and open the terminal window again, and let's start the server by typing py or Python if you're on Mac or Linux. There we want manage.py and then run server. Press enter. We should get the server running, and now let's open up the browser. Okay, I've got the browser open, and here's our project from the last lesson. Now note I have added a little bit of new CSS, so if you want to apply the same changes I did, you might grab that CSS for this lesson from the GitHub repo and apply it to your project as well. It's just a couple of changes. I'm not really going to go over any of that. Okay, from there, we need to go ahead and add /admin to our localhost 8000 that's in the URL. So /admin, press enter, and now we have the login to Django administration. But we haven't created a username or password yet. Let's go back to VS Code and do just that. Okay, I'm back in VS Code. I'm going to press Control-C to exit the server. And now we want to create a super user, and that would be a user that can access the admin panel. We can do that by typing py and then manage.py, as we do for so many things. And then we want to type create super user, all one word. Now let's press enter. From here, it's going to ask us several questions, and you may have a default name for your PC, Mac, or Linux. It says mine is PC, but I don't want to use that name. I'm going to enter in Dave as my username. Press enter there. I'm not going to enter in my email address, and that's not required. After that, a password. Now, there are some requirements here, but it doesn't tell us in advance. Like if I just type test, I'll have to enter it again, and after I enter it again, it tells me, that's too short. It must contain at least 8 characters. It's also too common. So now I'm going to say, no, I don't want to bypass the password validation. I want to go ahead and use the password validation. So it's going to ask me this again. Now I'll type test, press enter, have it enter that again, and it says, well, now I've got 8 characters, but it's still too common. So we need to think of something different. So I'm just going to type Dave test. Let's see if that works. Of course, I have to say no again here. So Dave test, that worked so far. Let's try it again. And yes, that's just fine. So it's not a mix of numbers and letters or anything like that. It just can't be too common of a word, and it must be at least 8 characters. So now I've created my super user Dave, and I have a password. Let's start the server once again with py manage.py run server. Press enter. Now that the server's up and running again, let's go back and log in. And we're back in Chrome at the admin panel. I'm going to type Dave, and then I'm going to type my password, press enter. And yes, we're logged in. This is the Django admin panel. You can see it says Django administration at the top. Also says welcome Dave. Hey, that's nice. We could view our site. So if we wanted to go back to our main site, we could change our password, we could log out, and there's light and dark mode here that we can toggle as well. And by the way, let me go ahead and click this. You see this one that's half and half? I think that means system preference. So the next click goes to light mode, and then the next back to dark. So I'm just going to leave it on dark. And from there, we've got groups and users. Well, we haven't created any group. That's, of course, for some user management as well, where we could group users. But we do have a user. Let's go ahead and click and look at this. And for users, we've got Dave in here. That's me. And let's scroll over. You can see staff status has a check mark, and that means I'm a super user that can actually access this admin panel. We could have other users that couldn't access the Django admin panel at all. And so besides just managing users, which is very nice, we can also use this admin panel as a CMS, which means content management system. But right now, we don't have anything in here. We were creating posts. We don't see any of those. Let's go back to VS Code and set it up so we do see the posts inside the admin panel. And we're back in VS Code. I'm going to close this terminal window. Let's also collapse the My Project directory here in the file tree and look inside of the post directory for our post app that we created. And now I want to go to the admin.py file that we have right here, and it says register your models here. So if we want to see any model we've created inside the admin dashboard, we need to add it here in this file. So let's do that here on line 4. I'm going to type admin.site.register, and then we need to import our post model. So here at the top, I want from.models, spell models correctly, and then I want import post, our post model that we had created before, and then we need to pass in the post to this register here. So let's save this. Now let's open the terminal once again, and it looks like it restarted. Let's go ahead and check our website. I'm back in the Django admin panel. Let's refresh and see if we see anything new. Yes, we do. We see our posts here. So let's click on posts and see what we've got. If you remember, we created a first post and a second post in the ORM lesson. So that's what we have here. We see both of those. And of course, there's other fields besides the title in the model. So if we click on this, like my first post, we can see those as well. Here's the title, the body, and the slug. And if you remember, there's also a date, but we're adding that date by default. It's nothing the user would edit or that we would edit as an admin. So we're not going to see that here either. But we have a body and we have a slug. Let's go ahead and update this first post, and we'll say, I have added my first post. And for slug, we'll say first-post. If you remember, the slug is what we would see at the end of the URL. Let's delete this for a second. I want to show you just something here for this. If I try to save this without one of these items now, it says we have an error. So now in this admin panel, all of these are required if we edit or if we add something new. So I'm going to say first-post for the slug, save. Now everything is good. It says the post, my first post was changed successfully. Notice we also have an add post button up here too, where we could add another post. Let's do that. So we'll add a post, and I'll say my elusive third post. I almost didn't make this post. That's why it's elusive, right? And we'll say third-post for the slug. Let's go ahead and save that. And now we have my elusive third post in the list as well. So you can see how we can manage content in the Django admin panel as well as managing users. Now let's go back to VS Code and display these posts. Back in VS Code, once again, let's close this terminal window. And now let's leave this post directory open here in the file tree. And we want to go to the views.py file. And here we need to import our model once again. So at the top, we're going to say from.models import post. Now that we have the post, we want to pass this so the template we render can actually use that post data. So first, let's just get all of the posts because it's going to render each post with a template. So to do that, let's say post equals, let's actually make this plural because they're posts now. It's going to equal post.objects.all. Remember, we learned this from working with the ORM. Then we can put the parentheses there, and that's going to get all of the objects for us. But now with our render statement, we need to add a third param. We have the request, and then we have post/post_list.html for the file. But now we actually need to pass this post data. So this is actually a dictionary here, a Python dictionary. We have curly braces, and I'm going to say posts, and then after that, it's going to be the posts data. And I can press Alt-Z so that wraps down, and we just see it all here without scrolling. But we've just added this extra param to our render call right here. And that's all we need to do. So we're bringing in the post model, we're getting all of the posts, then we're passing that data onto the template so we can use it in our post list template. So now, still inside of our post directory here in the file tree, let's open up the templates directory. And then remember, we had another post directory, and inside of that is our post list template. And we were extending that layout. So we had the nav bar at the top already. So we were already bringing in just a little bit of data here inside of this template, but it was static data, just things we had already typed in. So it says post list, and then we had an H1 with post list. Matter of fact, let's change this just to post in both of those, in the title and the H1. But after this, we can bring in a lot more data, and we can write some semantic HTML as well. So I'm going to start off by surrounding everything in a section element. And here I automatically got the closing one, so I'll just cut that with Control X, paste with Control V. After that, I'm going to add a for loop underneath the post. So how do we do that? Well, we already have the post data being passed by render. So we have curly braces and percents, just like we saw with the block content and the end block as well. And then of course, block title, here's block content. So we named these earlier. And then here, we're going to have our for loop. So I'm going to say for post in posts. Now this is our normal type of template tag, and we can write Python code there. But we're also going to bring in data, and you'll see it has a different type of tag. What I'm going to do first, before I forget to, is end the for loop with end for. Now in between, I'm going to use an article tag, which is semantic HTML. It's saying the type of data we're putting in here could be syndicated in a way, or it could actually be posted and reposted. So we're going to have more than one article on the post list page, and that's essentially what the article tag is saying. So from there, I'm going to have an H2, that's going to have the title, and then I'm going to go ahead and add another paragraph here. And then after this paragraph, I want one more paragraph. So what we're going to do is put in the title, the date, and then we'll put in the body of the post as well. So let's start off with this article that has the H2. Each one is actually going to have the H2. And let's put in the title. And this has the different type of tag here. So 2 curly braces, then we'll say post.title, and 2 more curly braces. So remember, we're going through all of the post data. So for post in post. So then inside of the loop, I'm referring to post here. I say post.title. Now this is going to be very similar for the other fields, so I'm just going to highlight that, Control C to copy, click in here, Control V to paste, Control V to paste. Now I'm going to say date, because after the title, I want the date of the post. Then I'm going to say body. So we're bringing in all of that data. Also on the article itself, I want to add a class, and I want to set that equal to post as well, just because we may want to style the posts later with a post class. Now let's hit Control in the back tick just to make sure our server's running. It is, so let's go to Chrome and check out our post list. I'm back in Chrome right where we left off at the admin panel looking at our posts. So now let's click View Site, and it brings up our site, and I can click the newspaper icon here to go to the post list. And there's our post. So we've got my first post, my second post, and my elusive third post. And you can see we've also got the date, and the first post and the third post both have a body as well. Let's go ahead and do something here though. We've got the first post. This is the oldest one at the top. What if we want the newest one at the top? Let's make that change quickly in VS Code. I'm back in VS Code. Let's go to the views.py inside of our post directory now. Let's close the terminal so we can see everything. And when we get all of the posts, it says post.objects.all, we can add something here. So let's say dot and then order underscore by, and then inside of these parentheses, we're going to put in date. That's the name of the field that we want to order by. So that's really all we need to do. And we're back in Chrome. Let me refresh the page, and no change. Let's go back to the code and let's sort this actually, or order this in a descending way. I didn't think to do that before, so it's actually still has the same first post at the top. But if we put a minus sign in front of the word date, I think we're going to get what we want with the newest at the top. Let's go back and check it out and refresh. And yes, my elusive third post is now at the top. So what we wanted to do was order by in a descending way, and we had to put that negative in there, that minus sign, to switch the sort order from ascending to descending. So now we're displaying these posts. I hope you've learned more about the Django admin dashboard and how it can help you manage content as well as users. We've added more information to our web app, and it's just getting interesting in this Django series. The source code for today's tutorial starts where the previous lesson ended, and there's a link in the description that provides the code for each lesson. I've got Visual Studio Code open. Let's open a terminal window by pressing Control and the backtick. From there, we want to start our virtual environment, so I'm going to type source, then .venv/scripts. You would want to type bin, all lowercase, if you're on Mac or Linux. Then activate, press enter. I can press enter again, and we should see that .venv in parentheses. Now let's go ahead and cd into the My Project directory, and we're where we need to be. Now before we dive into today's lesson, we need to go ahead and add the rest of the data to the posts we created in the previous lessons. So let's do that by starting our server and going to the Django admin. So I'm going to type py, then I want manage.py, and then run server. Press enter. It should start our server on port 8000 here on localhost. I'll press Control and then click this address, and then I'm going to open up Chrome so we can see our project. There it is. Let me go ahead and type /admin here at the end, and this should bring up the login screen. If you haven't saved your username and password into Chrome, you may need to enter that. If you remember, I typed Dave, and then I think my password was Dave Test. But we can go ahead and log in now. Now that we're logged in here in the Django admin, let's go to posts, and let's see what posts are still missing some data. We've got titles for all the posts, of course. But then here, if we look at the first post, you can see I've added this data. You may not have. I've got a body here that says I've added my first post, and then we've got a first post slug. Let me change that to my-first-post. And this is what a slug is. We'll see this at the end of the URL when we go to this post page. And today we're creating these post pages. So let me save that. And now let me go to my second post. Here you can see it's missing a body and a slug. So I'll just type another post for the body. And then for the slug, I'll keep my same pattern. So I'll say my and then second-post. Save that one. Now let's go to my elusive third post, and you can see it has everything here, but I'm going to edit this and put my at the beginning of the slug also, so it just matches the others. And now we've got that data. So you want to make sure you have a body and a slug for each post that you have right now, because we're going to use that today as we create these pages. And we're back in VS Code. Now you can see here in the terminal window, it logged everything we did in the Django admin here as the requests came into the server. I'm going to go ahead and close the terminal, but leave the server running. Now let's open the My Project directory. From there, we want to go to the Posts app directory, and there we want to go to the urls.py file. Now, previously, we created this URL pattern here to view our post lists, and it calls this post list function in the views, but we didn't add a name. So we can add this third param here to the path, and we want to provide a name for this link. So I'm going to put a comma here, and then I'm going to have name equals, and I'm going to put posts. So now you might wonder, why do we add a name to this URL, and how do we use it? Well, let's go ahead and do that. We'll go to the top level templates directory here. So not in the post directory, and we want to come down to templates. Now inside of templates, we have a layout.html. So let's open that up. And inside of the layout, we're going to /post. This is just a traditional HTML link. But instead of this, we can gain some value by adding a named link here inside of Django. And this will allow us to pass params and things like that, which we'll learn about later. Let's go ahead and change this, though. We're going to delete the /posts here. And instead, we're going to use part of our template language. So we'll start with a curly brace. And of course, we've got the ending curly brace. Then we put a parenthesis sign, and then, or not parentheses, what am I saying? A percentage sign, and then another percentage sign. So that's what we wrap our value in. Now inside of this link, to use the named URL, we'll say URL, and then inside of single quotes, because we have double quotes on the outside, we'll say posts. So now we're referring to that name we gave in the URLs file here, where we have name equals posts. This is what we're referring to in our layout file inside of this template language. We're saying, hey, this is a URL, and we want the URL that we named posts. So let's save these changes. And yes, we've saved the change in the urls.py as well. Now let's quickly go back to Chrome. And now we can click View Site to get out of our Django admin screen. Now we're back on our site. Let's make sure this link is working. And if you remember this little newspaper emoji, goes to our post list. And that's what we were changing inside of that layout.html was our navigation up here. So let's click this. And yes, it still works. So we're now using that named URL as we navigate to the post list. So now, as you may guess, we want to create URLs for each of our posts so we can navigate to the individual post pages. But before we do that, let's go to the Django docs. And in the Django docs, here we go, I am on a page that shows path converters, and I'm going to use a path converter. I'll link to this in the video description, but what I want to highlight here are just some of the path converters you can use, because I'm only going to use one today, but there's others you can read about here in the docs, like string and integer. But I'm going to use slug because we're working with our post slug, and slug matches any slug string consisting of ASCII letters or numbers, plus the hyphen, which I call a dash, and underscore characters. So for example, building dash your dash first dash Django dash site. So that's a longer slug, but that's typical there. And the search engines can actually read that as well. So you want to make something like that legible. It's often your post title, for example, and you're just putting hyphens in between, all lowercase as well. So now with that here in the docs, and remember I'll link to that in the description, let's go back and apply this to our application. Back in VS Code, I'm going to close this layout template for now that has our navigation menu. We want to be back in the urls.py file. So I'm going to click here on line 5 and then use Shift Alt and the down arrow and just copy that line down. Now let's make some changes. So the path converter we just talked about, we use those inside of the less than, greater than symbols, and we're going to use the slug path converter. But then we're also going to receive a param, and that's what we need to provide here. And that param is also going to be named slug in our case. So I'm also going to put slug right here. And that will apply that path converter to the slug data we get. So the path converter is here on the left, represented by slug, and the param we're receiving is here on the right, also represented by slug in this case. Now after that, we have views and we have our post list function again. Now we haven't created the function to create the post page yet or route to it, but here we're going to go ahead and list it. So I'll just say posts underscore page. And as a matter of fact, we could switch that to post page because we're only going to be working with one post at that point. So we just need to remember to create that exact same name when we go to our views file. And then the name over here, let's go ahead and just name this page. So it's totally different than our other named URL. Now with those changes, we can go ahead and save. If you look at your app right now, it'll probably have an error because this doesn't exist. So now we need to go to the views and create the post underscore page function. Okay, let's click on the views.py file here just underneath our urls.py. And inside of this file, we need to create a new function for our post page. So we'll say def, and we want post underscore page. This is also going to receive the request, and it's going to receive that slug param that we talked about. Now, inside of this function, for now, we're just going to echo what it receives, that slug. And to do that, we'll need to import something here at the top first. So I'm going to say from django.http, and I want import HTTP response, and there it is in our list. So we're going to use that HTTP response, and we'll do that right here when we return our echoed slugs. We'll say return HTTP response, and let's just pass in the slug. So that will let us confirm that this is working before we add some more details and maybe a post page template to this function like we did up here with the post list. Now we really can't check if this is working yet because we haven't created those links in our post list to pass the slug param. So right now we can't check this until we do that. So let's go up inside of our posts app here to the templates directory in the posts app. And then let's go to the posts underscore list.html where we can use that. And now inside of the template, I'm going to scroll down. What we want to do is take our H2 where the post title is and put a link inside of there. So I'm going to put this on separate lines as it's going to extend a little further. So we'll have the H2 wrapped around everything. And then we're going to have our anchor with the href. So we'll say href. And for now, I'll just put empty quotes so I can close this out. And I want to have the closing anchor afterwards, so /a there. I'll indent the post title as well. But now let's use our template language and our named URL once again inside of this href. So we'll have our curly brackets, our percentage signs, and then here we're going to say URL, and we're using the URL named page that we created, but we're still missing our slug. So how do we pass the slug along with this URL? Well, right here we can just put slug equals, and then notice how we're getting the other information from our post, like post.date and post.body. Well, we have a slug for each post as well, so we'll say post.slug right here, and that will pass that slug value for the post to our function then in views, and it should receive that here. So now that this looks like we want it, let's go ahead and check it out in Chrome. And I'm back in Chrome. Let's go to our application, and if I haven't done anything wrong, this should work. Let's go ahead and refresh the post list, and now you can see they've changed colors because of the little bit of CSS I have here. So we have links for each post. Let's see if this works when I click on my first post. And yes, it's really small up here because I didn't apply a template or any CSS, but I'll go ahead and zoom in. You can see it says my first post. Now I'll zoom back out because we don't want a 500% there, but you can see that echo from the HTTP response is working. So it will work for any of those pages, and it's pulling the slug. So as I click on my second post, if you look at the URL here, which I can't really zoom for you, but it has at the end of the URL, we have posts/my second post. And if we go to the first one, it's my first post and so on. So that should all match. Okay, we're back in VS Code. Now, something I want to point out is we've got a very generic name here for page. And right now we just have our posts app over here. And so we're using page there, and we know it's inside of the posts app. But what if our application expanded, or our whole Django project expanded, and we had more apps, not just posts? We couldn't just overlap with that same name page. So we kind of need to designate that, hey, this page, this named URL we've created, is inside of our posts application in the larger Django project. And that way we could name something else page, maybe inside of a user's app or something similar, and it would be designated inside of that app. So we need a way to do that. And we can. Let's just go back to the urls.py here, and above the URL patterns, I should say, let's put app_name, and here I'm going to say equals, and I'll put posts. So now we've designated that these URL patterns are inside of the posts app. But now when we link to those, instead of just using the name, we also want to designate, hey, it's the posts page, or the posts, and in this order, I guess I should have named this one list. Let's go ahead and do that. Let's rename this one list, for example, so it makes more sense. Posts list, then we'd have a posts page. So let's go ahead now, save this, and let's change those links we've created. So if you remember, we created one inside of the layout, and now I've changed the name. So this would be list, but to go ahead and use that namespace, we also want to say posts:*list. And so now it's going to specifically refer to the named URL list that's inside of the posts app. And now I'll go ahead and close the layout after we save that. Let's go to the post list as well, because we have this other named URL here. And here we want to say this is posts:*page. So now specifically the named URL page inside of the posts app, and save that also. Now we should just verify this is working. So let's once again go back to the application. Let's click on the home page, and now from here we could go back to the post list, and yes, it's still working as expected. And if we click on one of the posts, that's also still working as expected. Always good to check your links after you make changes like that. Back in VS Code, now let's go ahead and make a change here to our views, because we were using this HTTP response, but we really want to use a page template and not just echo the slug. We actually want to present a post page. Okay, let's start by deleting our import of the HTTP response. We won't be using that anymore, and that of course will eliminate this line inside of our post page function as well. Instead, I'm going to copy what we have up here under post list on lines 8 and 9 with Control-C, come down to line 13 and Control-V to paste. Now I'm just going to change some of what I have here. Here we were getting all the posts, and really we just want one post, and we're still going to use post.objects, but we're not going to use .all. Now we're going to use .get. And then inside of the get, we're going to pass slug equals slug. And that will get the one post that we have that matches the slug that we are receiving here in the function. From here, it's a similar render where we pass in the request, and we have posts, then we're going to have slash, and now we need to determine what we want to name our template, and I'm going to name that post underscore page. So get rid of the S, no more plural, so underscore page.html. And once again, instead of posts, I'm passing the post now. So we'll need to create this template. Right now, this would be an error, again, if you looked at the application, because our post underscore page.html template doesn't exist, but this did update the post page function like we need it. So now let's create that template. Okay, I'm going to click on the post underscore list inside of our posts app and inside of the templates directory and then the post directory. And here is the post underscore list template. Now I just want to click new file. I'm going to create post underscore page.html. Press enter. I've got a blank file, but I want to go back to the post list. This is going to be very similar. So for me, it's easier to just copy everything with Control A, then Control C, actually select everything with Control A, then Control C to copy everything. Now back to the post page and Control V to paste it all in. And now I'll decide what I want to be different. Well, one thing I know is this is a page dedicated to a specific post. So I want the post title to actually be the title of the page. So up here in our title block, I'm going to highlight posts on line 4 and paste in what I have for my template title here that we were also using below in the H2 on the post list. Now for this H1 here, this is also going to be the title of the page. So instead of post there, I'm going to paste in the title here. Now we don't have posts to loop through anymore. So I'm going to get rid of the for loop. And after that, I can really get rid of the article that we have wrapped around everything because we have this parent section, and I'm going to use this section. Now let me go ahead and indent the section tag here and then indent the H1. That looks better to me. Now we can get rid of this H2 altogether because we're using the H1 for the post title, and we don't need to link to anything from here. Then we can just get rid of the extra lines. And we're going to use the post date and post body. Now you could decide, do you want the date to show up before or after the post body, for example, on the page. But right now, let's just keep it really simple. So this is our post page where we're showing the title in an H1, and we've got a paragraph that shows the date, another paragraph that shows the body, and for the title of the page that shows up in the tab of the browser, this will also be the post title here. So let's go ahead and save. And notice we're still extending the layout. So we'll still have our navigation from that layout template at the top of each post page. And now we're back in Chrome. Let's check these links out and see if our post pages are working as expected. I'll click on my first post. And now, instead of getting that echo of just the slug on a blank page, we're actually getting a post page. Now, we don't have a whole lot of content, but we have my first post in the H1, then we have the date for the post, and then we have the body of the post. And if we go back to our list, we should see that for the second and third post as well. So I'll go back again, there's the third post. So this all works as we want it to, and the others are still linking. So we've used Slugs today, we've used named URLs, and we created a template that we can use for each of our posts to have its own individual page as we navigate through our application. One final note today, guys, and this goes back into our layout template, and it's really nothing specific to Django. It's just something that's bothering me, so I want to go ahead and add this. And that is we're using emojis here. Now, they're not actual images where we would provide an image tag and an alt tag, but screen readers and accessibility sometimes struggle with emojis or what we mean by emojis. Now, home or house might be translated correctly by a screen reader. It's going to get Unicode characters. I just want to show how you can update this. So if you do use emojis in your page, like I am in this nav menu, it's actually accessible. So to do that, let's wrap this in a span element. And here after this, we'll say /span. And now we want to add a role. So let's say role equals, now this is image because these emojis aren't really images, so we have to assign the role. But from there, we also need a label. So we can use aria-label. And here I can put home inside of that. So this will help with accessibility when you use emojis like we are in this example project. Now I'll allow you to go ahead and add the other two spans. I'll do that as well, so you'll see it in GitHub with my source code. But go ahead and add spans with the role image and the ARIA label that you think is appropriate for each emoji. The source code for today's tutorial starts where the previous lesson ended, and there's a link in the description that provides the code for each lesson. I've got VS Code open. Let's open a terminal window with Control and the backtick. From here, I'm going to type source.venv, there we go, /scripts/activate to activate our virtual environment. And we can confirm that's going with the .venv in parentheses. And after that, let's go ahead and cd into the My Project directory. And now we're ready to start. We want to add images to our project today. So I'm going to close the terminal window, and I'm going to go ahead and display the My Project directory here on the left, and then open the My Project directory that's nested inside of that. From there, we want to go to the settings.py file. And let's go ahead and scroll down to where we were in a previous lesson where we defined a static path. It's all the way here at the bottom, if I remember correctly. Yep, we have a static URL and a static files directory. We need to add to that. And what we need to add is the media URL, so media_URL. And this is saying where we're going to find images. So here we'll say equals, and then we want to put in a directory, and this is going to be the media directory. So I'm going to put in media/, just like we have above here with static /. Then underneath that, we also need to put in a media_root. Now this is saying where that directory is going to be. So here we'll say equals, then we have to put in just a little bit more. So we'll say os.path, and then after path we put join. We're going to pass in the base_dir for directory. So that means our top level My Project directory here. And after that we can put a comma, and then I want to put in single quotes and just put in media, so we're naming our media directory here that we named over here. Now we haven't created that media directory. It will get created on its own when we upload an image. So let's just save these two changes to our settings file. And now we need to go to the file underneath it that is urls.py. Okay, in urls.py, I want to scroll down once again to where I can see the URL patterns that we have defined here. We need to have a couple of imports, and then we're going to add to our patterns. So for the imports, I'm going to say from Django.conf for config.urls.static. Then I want to import static. And don't feel bad if you can't memorize these. I don't either. So then I have from Django.config again, just conf, and then I want not another dot, but import settings. And those are the settings that we just defined. So after you have those two imports, then underneath URL patterns, we can add to them. So here I'm going to say URL patterns, and I need to spell that correctly, then plus equals. And after that, I want to use static that we imported. That's a function. Then inside of static, I'm going to use the settings that we imported and then say dot media_URL. So here we're referring to that media URL that we just defined in the settings. Then I want to put a comma, and now put in a named param here, document_root, and then we'll set this equal to settings.media_root, and that's the one we just defined as well. I'm also going to press Alt-Z because this is a long line, and this will just get it to wrap down to the next line so we can see everything on the screen all at once. So now we've imported these two lines here at the top. We have static and settings, and then we used both of those as we added to our URL patterns. So we're essentially telling our app where it can find our images. Now we're ready to close our My Project directory and open the post directory that we have here. And let's go to the models.py file. But before we make any change to our model, we need to install something. So this is where it's important that we've started our virtual environment. So we're putting all of our dependencies in that environment. So I've been doing that at the beginning of every lesson because you never know when you might need to add something. That's what we're going to do now. So make sure you've started that virtual environment first, like we did at the beginning of the lesson. Then open the terminal window again. We need to say pip and I just want lowercase here, pip install, and then we want pillow. It's going to help us here as we use images. We're installing pillow to our project. Looks like it's good now. It says I could also upgrade pip if I want to. I'll do that later. But we've added pillow. So now we're going to make a change to our model and we won't have a problem with it. What I'm going to do is add something here to the post, and I'm going to call it banner. So we can add a banner to all of our posts in the application. We set this equal to models. And after that, we want to put in image field. And we couldn't do that without pillow, or at least we couldn't do it without getting an error. Then we're going to put default, and I want to set this to a default image in case I don't upload one for the post. So I'm going to call this fallback.png, and we'll need to provide that as well. After that, I want to set blank equal to true, and that just means we're not requiring an image. So if we don't provide one, it's okay. So let's save the change to our model. And after that, if you remember from the previous lessons, when we were working with a model, we needed to make a migration if we changed our model, and then of course apply that migration to the database. I'm going to type clear just to clear out the console here. And now let's type those commands. So we'll type py, and remember I'm on Windows. If you're on Mac or Linux, you might need to type Python, but I type py, and I want manage.py, and then I want to type make migrations. Press enter. Looks like everything went as planned. So we've made the migration. Now let's apply it to our database. So I'll type py and then manage.py and migrate. And now it's applied that change to our database. Now let's see these changes in place by running our server. So I'll type py and then manage.py and then run server. Press enter and it should start the server on port 8000. I can hold down the control key and click, and there's our application. Now let's go ahead and go to the admin panel. So at the end I want to type // if I can get my fingers on the correct keys, /admin. There we go. It's remembered my login, and I hope you remember yours as well from previous lessons. Let's go ahead and log in. Now we can see our users and our posts. Let's look at the posts once again. And let's look at my first post that I have here. And you can see there is now a banner area here along with everything else that we previously had for our posts. And it's got currently the fallback.png that we defined. Of course, we haven't put that in our media file yet. We don't even have a media folder, but we will as soon as we start adding some images. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to click choose file. You can see I've got some images ready to go here. So I'm going to choose beach chair and add that to this post. I can save. Let's go to the second post. Let's add one here too. I'll choose water fun and let's save that. Now let's just leave the third post here with the fallback so we can see what that's like. And let's add one new post, and I'll say ready for vacation, aren't we all? After that, I'm so ready for spring break. And then we'll say ready-for-vacation for the slug. And now let's choose one more image and we'll say ready to go. There we are. Let's save that. Now we've added images to all of our posts except one, and that one, the third one, should use the fallback as well. So now we can click view site. And if we go to the site, we're not going to see the images yet, but we do see the new posts. Now, why don't we see the images? Well, we haven't added them to our template, so let's do that. I'm back in VS Code. Let's close the terminal window. We can leave the server running. Something else we should check here before we make any changes to our template to add the image. Let's make sure that media directory was created. You can see mine right up here, and it's got the 3 images now. So we didn't create that on our own. Django created it as we added images. Notice we don't have the fallback yet, so I'm going to pull my folder up here, grab this fallback image and drag it right over here as well. So there's our fallback image that should be applied to that third post also. But now I want to go to the templates directory and then my post page template. And right here, we can add that image. So above the H1, so let's put it at the very top. Here we'll put in our image element, and it should have a source. And we can set that equal to, of course, quotes. And then we can use our templating language here with the 2 curly braces on each side. And then we can just say post.banner.url. We need that extra URL there. We can also make this I would say accessible as well. As we noted in the last lesson, I want to think about accessibility as we go. So anytime I provide an image, I also want some alt text. Let's put in the quotes here. Let's put in our 2 curly braces. Let's make the alt text the post title as well, because we should kind of have an image description that goes with the title or the theme of the post, shouldn't we? So after that, we're pretty much ready to call it. We can put a slash and then the greater than sign to close out the tag. But one other thing I'd like to do is maybe put in just a little bit of image styling, or this image could be really big on the page. So here I want to put in a class, set this equal to banner, and then we can add just a little bit of CSS to our CSS file. And if you remember where that is, it's in our static directory. Come down here, go inside the CSS, open up the style.css, and at the very bottom, I'm just going to put a banner class. And it will be very simple. I want a display set to block for the image. Then I want a width set to 100%, but then I also want a max width, say no larger than 800 pixels. That should still be a pretty good size banner. Okay, with those changes in place, let's open up the terminal. We can see that the server's still running. Now let's go back to Chrome. I'll pull that up quickly. And here inside of Chrome, we should be able to refresh the page and then see our banner for the post. And there it is. Now we should see the banners for the other post as well. So here's the second post with our water fun. Now the third post, remember, it has our fallback image. And yes, that worked out as well also. And then this final one should have the ready for vacation image. We've learned a lot in the first 6 lessons of this Django series, and today it's time for a student challenge. In lesson 2 of the series, we learned about Django apps, and we added a posts app to our Django project. We also learned about templates. You may want to review that lesson before today's challenge. Today, I want to challenge you to add a users app to our Django project, just like we did with the posts app. You will also need to create one template and name it register.html. And you can see that's what I've got open on the web page right now. And at the URL users/register is where you should find this. So if you complete the challenge correctly, you should also be able to navigate to users/register and see your register.html template. It's always good to apply the skills you've learned, but no worries if you get stuck. So if you don't want to see the solution, you should pause the video now, because the solution is coming up next. I've got VS Code open and I'm ready to go over the solution to today's challenge. I hope you did well. So let's start by opening a terminal, which is what we usually do. Of course, then we type source.venv/scripts/activate and press enter to start our virtual environment. From there, we also need to cd into the My Project directory, and we're ready to get started with the code. So before we close the terminal window, we want to create our new app called Users. We're already in the My Project directory, and we can open that over here in the file tree. And here we see the post directory that was created when we created the Posts app. So we should see a directory for users after we create the Users app. Let's do that by typing py manage.py, and then we want to type start app and then the name of the app. So users. I'll press enter. That should get created. And now we see a users directory over here in the file tree as well. Now we can go ahead and close the terminal window for now. And let's open up this My Project directory. This is the parent directory, of course, for our project, and it has the master settings. We need to tell it about the users app. So let's go to the settings.py file, and we should be able to scroll down until we see installed apps. And if you remember, this is where we added posts before. So now we need to add users under installed apps. And I'll put a comma after that also, and go ahead and save. Now let's close the My Project directory in the file tree. Well, not the main one, I guess, the one underneath. There we go. Let's open up the post directory so we can get a look at this urls.py that we already have here, because we want to create something like this in the users directory that we just created for the users app. So what I'm going to do is click somewhere in the file and Control A to select all, and then Control C to copy all, because I'm going to paste this into the new file that I create. and then just delete a few things and change a few things. We'll go a little faster that way. So now I'm going to open this users directory. Notice there is no urls.py in here, so we need to create that file. It's going to be urls.py. Now I'm going to paste in what we gathered from the posts app, and we can just change a couple of things. The imports are the same. The app name is going to be users, not posts. And then for patterns, we're only going to have one path here. So I'll delete the one with the slug. And now for this path, we want to go to a register location. So this is going to be register slash. And now let's change the views.postlist to views.register_view. And let's change the name here to register also. Now, of course, you didn't have to have this exact name. This is what I'm naming. We'll just see if it all works the same as your solution. And now we need to go back to the My Project directory. Let's open that back up and go back to the urls.py that is in the My Project directory, and we'll scroll down to the URL patterns. Notice we included a path here for the posts in the URL patterns because, again, this is kind of the parent for all the other apps that we add to the project. So it needs to know about all of these. So what I'm going to do is click on line 27 you see here that has the post URLs. I'm just going to press Shift Alt and the down arrow to copy that down. Now we want to do the same thing here for our users app. So I'm going to put users slash, and here I'm going to have users.urls. And you can see I've got a little red text here at the top. That's telling me something is wrong, as well as a little red here to the right. What has happened is I forgot to put a comma after I copied that line down. So after I do that, everything's good and we can save the file. Now let's close up that My Project directory again because it gets a little long over here. And let's go back to the urls.py that we created. And notice we referenced a view here, register view. We haven't created that yet, so we need to go to our views.py file and create this function that we mentioned here, which is register_view. So let's click on views.py. Now notice Django has already imported render at the top, so we can just create our view function underneath the comment that says create your views here. So we'll start off with def, and then we named it register_view, and then it's going to receive request. And then inside of this function, we return, and then we want render, and then we have the request as the first param. After that, we're going to have users slash register.html. Now we haven't created that register.html template yet, but we will. Okay, let's save these changes in the views.py file. And now I'm going to highlight users, the users directory here in the file tree, just so I know I'm creating the directory where I want to. I'm going to click new directory up here at the top. Then I'm going to create a templates directory. Then inside of templates, I'm going to create another directory named users once again. And this is following the same pattern that we did for posts. So if I open up posts, we see templates. If I open up templates, we see posts, and then we have our templates. I'm doing the same thing here. We've got users, templates, users, and then in this users directory is where I'm going to put our register template. So this is register.html. Now, once again, to make things go a little quicker, I'm going to open up that post directory and look at our post page template here. It's extending the layout that we've previously created, so it pulls that in along with that static formatting like our CSS. And then it has the layout of the page. So once again, I'm going to click in the file, Control A to select all, Control C to copy all of that. Now I'll close up the post directory and come down to our register.html, and Control V is what pastes all of that in. Now here, I'm just going to change a few things. So the title, I'm going to delete out of here, and I'm just going to type in register a user. And then, of course, we don't have all of the things that we see down here in the content block either. So I could just delete all of this for now, because all you saw on my example page was an H1 that also said register a new user. Close out that H1 and save our template. Okay, hopefully we don't have any mistakes. I'm going to open the terminal back up. Then I'm going to type py and then manage.py and run server. And this should start our server on port 8000. So far, so good. I'll hold down the control key and then click this URL to launch this in the browser. Now I'll pull this up, and we're looking at our home page. This is what I expected to see first. Now after this, let's see if we can go to the /users/register/ page, press enter, and we have register a new user. So everything worked as expected. This is fairly large though, so let's make one change. I'm going to come back in here and we're going to go to our static directory that we have, top level. Here it is. Let's go to the CSS and make a quick change. Let's make the H1 just a little smaller, maybe the same size as the H2. So I'm just going to put H1, H2, save our CSS. Now they'll be the same size, which is fine. We just need that semantic difference if we don't mind them being the same size. So I'm going to hold down the Shift key because sometimes if you just refresh, you might get the same static content you had before. But if I hold down Shift and refresh, it should serve a new page. And now register a new user is smaller. I can click these other links and everything else still looks good too. So very nice. Now I don't have a link to that register a new user yet, but I can use the back button and get all the way back there. So I hope you completed this challenge and I hope my solution helped you through any sticking points. The source code for today's tutorial starts where the previous lesson ended, and there's a link in the description that provides the code for each lesson. I've got VS Code open. Let's open a terminal window. And as always, we need to start our virtual environment. So I'm going to type source, then .venv/scripts/activate and press enter. After that virtual environment's installed, we need to cd into the My Project directory. And we're ready to begin. Let's close the terminal window and open the My Project folder in the file tree. And after that, we need to open up our users app and let's scroll down to the views.py file. Now in this file, we've got an import we need to add at the top so we can add in our user registration form. And as I've said before, I don't memorize all of these, so it doesn't hurt to look at the docs or take notes as well. So we're going to say from Django.contrib.auth.forms. And what we're doing is importing a form. Django already provides a lot of the authentication that we need to add, and that's a nice addition to Django. That's something that would take us a long time to create otherwise. So from this, we are going to import the user creation form. Now, after we have that imported, we need to create the form in our register view function. So we'll say form equals user creation form, and we'll call that with the parentheses after. Now, finally, in the return here, where we call the render function, we need to pass in that third parameter that we have seen before. This is an object. So here we're going to have form and then a colon, and we're going to pass in the form that is created. And I'm going to press Alt-Z so that wraps down so you can see everything here on the screen. And from here, we just want to save our changes for now. We're going to come back and make more changes, but this is going to create the form and pass it to our register template. Now, we haven't created anything else except an H1 from the last lesson on the register.html template, but we're going to add more to it now. So let's go back to the file tree and open up the templates directory and then look at our register.html template. So now we're passing that form we just created in the view function to this template. And we need to add a few other things to this template so we can use that form. And so we still need to add a form tag in our HTML. And this action is going to submit to this same form page, and it's going to be at users/register/. Let's add a couple of more attributes here to our form tag as well. So we also want to say what method, and we are submitting this form with the post method. And then I'm going to need to press Alt-Z to wrap everything down again because this will get to be a longer line, but I'm going to put in a class just for some CSS that I'm providing today for this form. So Django is unopinionated about the CSS. You can supply your own to the form, and I've done that in advance. Again, this is not a CSS tutorial, so you can grab that CSS out of the file for this lesson. And remember, that's in the static directory where that CSS is created that we've been using on all of our templates. So here I created a class that is form-with-validation. And so that will be referenced in the CSS. And I'm going to press Alt-Z so that wraps down. And then inside the form, we're going to need to add a couple of things as well. So here is where we're going to provide that form that we created in the function. So 2 curly brackets and then form. Now after that, we also need a submit button. And if there's only one button in a form, it defaults to type submit. So we don't have to declare the type. I'm just going to put a button, and then I'm going to say submit on the button. And by default, this will be the button that submits the form. Now we're not quite finished with our form yet either, and that's because Django also provides some security through a CSRF token, and that stands for cross-site request forgery. So it's ensuring that this form is being submitted from our site and not from something pretending to be our site. And to do that, we have to include that CSRF token. And we can do that. I'm just going to start typing CSRF, and you can see it comes up in my menu. So I'll press Tab and it adds it, but it's using our same templating language here that has the curly brackets and %. So you see that CSRF token. If we did not include this in our form, Django would throw an error. So let's save these changes. And now let's open up a terminal window once again, and let's go ahead and start our project just to make sure the form is working as expected so far. It's not going to save a user. We just want to make sure we're not getting any errors. So we'll type py manage.py and then run server. Press enter. It should start at our local host, that is 127.0.0.1, and then port 8000. So I'm going to hold down the control button and click that. And once it starts, I can pull it up in Chrome. Here is our site, and everything's running as expected so far. Now let's make sure we have that same registration page that we had from the previous tutorial. So that should be at users/register. And here it is. And I have a button that's not formatted. I didn't expect that, but everything else kind of looks like I expect it to. It looks like I need to add just a little more CSS as well. And I'll add that before we move on to the next part. But right now we see some of this. We get the username, we see what's required here, and then we have the input for the username, we have the password confirmation, and of course I don't want my button to extend all the way across the screen, so I will fix that. Let me go ahead and put in a new user here, and again, it's not going to save the user, but I'll just say Fred, and here I'll say chips1234, chips1234, and press enter. And yes, no errors, and we stayed on this form page because it submits to the same page. So everything's working as expected so far, except this little bit of extra CSS I'm going to add to fix this. And I'm back in VS Code. I just need to apply the class to the button that I forgot to apply to fix that button with the CSS. So the class equals form-submit. And now next time we see that button, it should be a more normal size. But now we need to add the code that will actually save the user after we submit the form. And it requires some conditional logic. So let's go back to our views.py inside of the user's app. And this is where we can apply that conditional logic. Now we need one more import at the top. So besides render here coming from Django shortcuts, let's put a comma. We also need the redirect function, because if we successfully save a user, then we're going to redirect back to the post list. So now inside of our register view function, we'll start our conditional logic with an if statement. We can say if request.method equals post, and this needs to be all caps specifically here. So inside of this, if the request method is post, and that means the form has been submitted. Remember, we're submitting that with a post request, the post method, back to this same address. So this function will handle this request. And if it is a post method, then we're going to say form equals user creation form like we did before, but now we're going to pass in the request.post information that we receive. And notice that also needs to be a capital .post there. So now the form has been submitted with information, and it will validate the form. And if the form is valid, we want to save the user. So let's handle that with a nested if statement here. So inside of our if statement, we have another if statement. We'll say if form.is_valid, which is a function that will return true or false. So if it is true, then we're going to say form.is_valid, .save, and that saves the new user. So if the form checks out, it saves. And then after that, we need to redirect. So we want to return our redirect. And now we're going to redirect to the posts app, and we're going to use the named URL list. So we see the post list. This is a lot like we used the slug previously. So we're using the name of the app and then the named URL reference inside of that app. So we go to the post list. And this is what happens if the form is submitted and it is valid. So if the form is submitted and it is a post method, and that's what should happen, then we're inside of this if statement. So there's two possibilities here. Either the form is valid or it is not. Either way, the form validation is going to check here. So it's creating this user form with form validation. For example, say I tried to create another user with the name Dave. It would tell me a user already exists with that. So that's an example where it would have validation, but the form would not be valid. And so if that happens, we need to come down here below, and there's two other possibilities. One was the possibility we already had, which was the else. If it's not submitted through a post, typically a GET request, like when we would first visit the form, then we would just create the empty form. So that should be the else if it's not the post method. And then the other possibility is we don't have a valid form. So then it's just going to skip this else because it already was inside of this first if here. And then it will just go to this return, and it will return the form with that validation saying, hey, there's already a user with this name. Likewise, if it was just requested as an empty form here, it's also going to return the form, and we'll just see that empty form. So the three different possibilities. I hope you follow along with that logical flow of information here, conditional logic. So now with these changes in place, let's save this once again and pull our form back up. Let's check our terminal to make sure this server is still running. Mine is, and I hope yours is. If not, go ahead and start your server again. Now let's go back and look at our form once again. I'm going to hold down the Shift key and refresh, and there our submit button is correct. Now let's go ahead and submit a user just to create a new user. So let's call this user Tony, and I'll make his password chips1234. Chips1234. It should pass all of that requirements that we see there. I'll press enter, submit, submitted, created the new user, and took us straight to the post list. So that redirect also worked. So now I once again want to go back to the users/register. Now let me try to create a user with my name because I know I'm already saved in there. So I've got Dave. And here I'll just put in a password that I know won't pass the validation for the password either, like test. Now let me submit, and we can see this validation comes back. So here was another possibility. We submitted the form, but the form was not valid. And through the CSS I added, you can see that clearly the error is here. So a user with that name already exists. Then also, what was not correct about the password. So we have to have those things. And of course, we've seen the third possibility already, and that's when we first load the form before we filled it out. That GET request just gives us the empty form. So we've seen all three of the possibilities through that conditional logic. Now let's also go to the admin. If you remember your admin login from previous lessons, and here we want to just verify that our new user Tony is in our database. So I'm going to enter in my username and password here, which I believe was Dave Test, this example. So now I'm here in the admin window, and I go to users, and here's Tony. He's not an admin himself. I'm just looking at the users. I'm an admin, so you can see that staff status with the green check mark here versus the red check over here. But Tony has been added as a user to our Django application. Now, the only other thing I'd like to do before we finish our user registration today is go ahead and add a link to that in our nav bar. So let's go back to VS Code. I'm back in VS Code right now. Let's go ahead and collapse the users app because that's not where our nav bar is. Our nav bar is in the templates for my project and then inside of the layout.html that we are including then in all of the other templates. So we have that nav bar at the top. And as we scroll down here, we see the nav. And I've got several things here on the page. It's interesting that I've got an extra space here. We don't really need that, so I'm going to remove that line there and format this over like I want it to be. But after that, I'm just going to highlight the last one here, which was the link to the post list, then do Shift Alt and the down arrow, and it copies it down. Now I'll put an extra space here and that little pipe symbol, so we have another pipe between. And let's change the emoji here. So instead of a newspaper, let's put in maybe a rocket because we are launching a new account. That makes sense to me. Okay, the URL here. Once again, we're using the name of the app and then the named URL reference. So here, this is users. And if I remember correctly, here this is registration, I believe. It might be register. So let's double check that, and we can go back into our users app, look at the urls.py. It's users. Oh, it's not registration, it's just register. So let's make sure we put that in there correctly. Users and register should be the link that would work for our URL. The only other thing I want to add that I'm not seeing here as I change the ARIA label for this to user registration is I want to add a title for each of these. So as we mouse over, you can actually see a tooltip. I'll add one here, let you add the rest, but in the source code with the course resources, they will all be added. So all you want to do is add a title attribute and put in the same thing you essentially have for the ARIA label. But that way, when we put our mouse over the icon, it will actually pop up the little tooltip so users can also see the text of what the icon is if they're unsure. Okay, let's go back now and look at our application in Chrome and make sure we have an updated nav bar and the link is working. So I'm going to hold down the Shift key and click refresh. There is our rocket. Let me mouse over the home where I added the tooltip. There you can see it pops up a little tooltip that says home. So I'm going to add those others after the tutorial. Remember, that will be in the course links. You can do the same with that title attribute. Now let's click the rocket and make sure our link works. And yes, so that takes us directly to our user registration page. The source code for today's tutorial starts where the previous lesson ended, and there's a link in the description that provides the code for each lesson. I've got VS Code open. Let's open a terminal window, and as always, let's type source.venv/scripts/activate to activate our virtual environment. We can press enter, and yes, see that's in parentheses. It's good to go. Now we need to cd into the My Project folder. And now that we're in there, we're ready to begin. Now, before we close the terminal window, let's go ahead and start the project in the browser, or start the server and then open the browser. So I'm going to type py and manage.py, and then I want to type run server. Press enter, and it should start it on localhost port 8000. Here we see it. I'm going to press Control and then click that address. Should open it in Chrome for me. And there's the project. Now, last time we created a user registration page and our rocket emoji is linked to that. So let me click that and we can view this registration page. Now, our login page today is going to be very similar. Let's go back to VS Code and add another emoji up here for the login page. Okay, I'm back in VS Code. I'm going to close the terminal window, just leave the server running. And then I'm going to go to the templates directory and then the layout.html template. That is where we have that little menu at the top. And if I scroll down, we can see the different links here. I'm going to press Alt-Z just to make sure everything is wrapping so we can see it all here on the screen. Now, after I do that, I want to highlight the last one, which is user registration. And then I'm going to press Shift Alt and the down arrow, and it just copies that down. Now, after user registration, I want to space over and leave a little pipe symbol, so I'm dividing the emojis in the menu. Leave a space after that as well. And now, instead of users register here, we're going to go to users login. Of course, we haven't created this link yet, so we'll need to do that in our application. But we're just adding this to the nav menu to begin with. And then we're going to highlight the word registration here, and then I can press Control-D and it'll highlight the next one also. Then when I type, it will change both at once, and I'll just switch that to user login. And now we want to change the rocket emoji too, because we don't want two rocket emojis. I'm going to press the Windows key and the period. Now, you might not be on Windows. You may have another way of bringing up emojis, or you don't have to use emojis if you don't want to. That's just what I'm doing. So here, I'm going to type something like sign in and see what it gives me. No, that's not right. Let's look for a lock. There we go. So here is a padlock, and I think it has a little quill from a pin. That kind of indicates a sign in as well. So that's what I'm going to use. I'll save that much. And now let's get started on the rest of the app. For a user login, as you might expect, we need to go into our users application here. So I'll close up templates, open up users here in the file tree. Let's go down to the urls.py file. Now again, very similar to the register view. So I'm going to click on the line that we have our path here, and then I'm going to press Shift Alt and the down arrow to copy that down. And I'll just make some changes to this line. So I'm going to call this login, and as a matter of fact, I can press Control D again, and then Control D again, and highlight all three of the words register in that same line that we copied down, and change those to login, because that's what I want. I want the login path, I want the views.login_view function that we're going to call, and then the URL is a named URL, and it's also going to be login. Now let's go to the views.py file that we have just underneath urls.py, and we need to add that function. And I'm also going to press Alt-Z here, just in case something is going off the screen. No, it looks okay. So now we want to come down underneath this function, press Enter a couple of times, and I'll say def, and then I want login_view, and it's also going to receive the request just like our register view function did. So much like the register function, this could be a get or a post request. Now the get request is requesting the form before it is filled out. The post request is when the form is submitted. So we can put some of that logic in right now, just like we see above for the register view function. So I'll say if request.method equals post, and we want all caps there. Now inside of this, we're going to use a different form. So at the top here where we have import user creation form, this is going to come from the same place. This is already the auth form. So we'll just put a comma. I want to put a capital A, and maybe I had all caps lock on. There we go. Authentication form. You can see the auto completion here. So I'll just press tab. We're going to use this authentication form. So with that import, let me scroll for some room now. And after the if request.method equals post, I'm not going to put anything on that line immediately. I'm going to do the else first, because the else would be the get request, and that's where the form is requested. So now let's say form equals authentication form, and we'll call that. Now that looks a lot like what we did with the user creation form above. And it's the same type of logic as well. So we can also follow that up with the return of the form. So let's copy this line here on line 13 with Control C. Now go down to our last line, and then we'll press return to go underneath it. But then we don't want this to be part of the else block. So you want to backspace to go back over. Now Control V will paste that line back in. And we're rendering once again, and we're going to pass in the request. Now this will be a different path here though, not users register. This will be the login.html. And of course the form that is being passed is a different form. This is the authentication form. And you can see VS Code says we have a problem because we didn't put anything in the first part of the if block. So we'll change this, but just right now I want to go ahead and return a redirect. And we're going to redirect to the users:login. So that's essentially our login form as well. So this will just send us back to an empty form even if we submit the form right now. And now we need to create our login form. So let's go to the templates that we have here in the users app. And then inside of templates, we have users folder and then the register template. So let's click on that. And this will be almost identical. So I'm just going to click here somewhere in the file, then Control A to select all, and then Control C to copy everything. Now I'm going to create a new file over here right beside register, and we'll call this login.html. So now I'm going to Control V to paste everything in, and we'll just change a couple of things again. We want the same extends with the layout. We want the same block title, but we want to change the title, and that's the same title that's in the H1. So once again, as I select register a new user, press Control D, Now it's selected both, and I can just say user login. And so that's a nice change. We're going to use this same form with validation CSS class that I applied here for the register form as well. Alt-Z once again to get this to wrap down. Now, the action is going to change. This is not going to users/register anymore. This is going to users/login. So that's what we'll use there. We still need the token. It will still be a post or a method post here for the form. And the submit button can stay the same too. So those are the only changes we need. And now we can just save the file. With the form in place, let's go back to our views.py file and add a couple more things. So now that we have that, let's look at this return redirect, because that's not what we're going to keep here. We're going to put in a form equals authentication form and call the parentheses after it as well. But now it needs to receive something. As notice up here in our register view, the user creation form received the request.post. But I'm going to mouse over this authentication form function. It's a little different. So notice it receives a request and then possibly args and then kwargs. If you haven't heard of kwargs, that stands for keyword arguments. Notice this sentence right here. The request parameter is set for custom auth use by subclasses, and the form data comes in via the standard data kwarg. So it's a keyword argument. And so we need to specify that data keyword here as well. So we can't just pass in the request.post. We need to say data equals request.post. And now notice we had the if form is valid above in our register view function. We're going to use that same logic as well. So I'm going to copy that, and I'll scroll here just a little bit because this applies the validation where we set the form equal to the authentication form and pass in the data. So now we can check to see if the form is valid as well. Now I'm going to temporarily leave a step out. I'll just mark this with a comment and say log in here. And then after that, I'm going to go ahead and return and use a redirect. And we'll do the same thing we did up here. As a matter of fact, I could have just copied this line. So the line that we didn't use is the form.save because we're going to use something different here to log the user in. But we are going to redirect to our post list. And I'm just noticing my indentation here is off and VS Code is telling me that. There, that looks better. So once again, save that change. So we've got enough logic here right now to load the form, also submit the form and get some validation, although it won't log us in. And then if we do at least pass the login test, the validation, we would be redirected to the post list. However, if we don't pass the test, we would be sent back and given the validation messages. So let's pull this up in Chrome and check it out now. I need to refresh the page. Now we've got our icon for the login. I'll click that, and here's the login. So I'm going to type something that I know won't work. Of course, this already fulfilled the GET request by loading the form. So now this would be the validation check, and I'll say Dave, and this would be something like test1234, which is not my password. Submit, and yes, we get some validation back here. It says, please enter a correct username and password. Note that both fields may be case sensitive. And thankfully, it is not telling us what is wrong or which one. We don't need to give any hints to anybody that isn't or shouldn't be logging in. So fortunately, we should know our password, and then it doesn't need to tell us which field was wrong. So my password, I think, was Dave Test, if I remember right. So now when I submit, yes, it takes me to the post list. Now I'm not logged in yet. We haven't added that logic. But everything we've added so far is working as expected. And I'm back in VS Code. Let's scroll to the top. We have one more import to add. So we can say from Django. And as I mentioned before, I don't have these memorized either. It takes quite a bit of work to memorize each one of them. So from Django contrib.auth, we want to import login. There you go. So don't feel bad if you don't have any of these imports memorized either. Okay, after we import the login, then we want to scroll down to where we're actually going to log the user in. And we had our comment here, login here. So we're going to use this login function. Of course, I want to line up the tabs just right. I'm going to use login. I'm going to pass in the request first. And after that, we need the user. So to get the user, since we've already verified the form is valid, we can call form.get_user. Of course, we need to put parentheses after that, like any method, and then it's going to return the user. So you could actually set a user variable above with form.getUser, but you don't need to because you can just call it right here as you pass in the param, and it will return the user. So the login needs the request and the user value. Now, it would also be nice if we logged in users as they registered. So once they've registered, they should be logged in and not have to take an extra step. Well, we can do that too. Let's just scroll back up here and use that same login function. Notice the form save that we were calling to save the new user. It actually returns the user value also. So here we can say login, and we can pass in the request, have a comma, and then we can just put form save in there where below we had form.getUser. This will also return a user value. So now let's save these changes and test it all back out in Chrome. I'll pull up the browser window, and now we should go to the sign in. Well, first of all, before we go to sign in, actually, let's go to the admin so you can verify that I am not signed in. I have an admin user, but it wants me to log in, so I am not signed in. So I'll just back out of this, and let's go ahead and I'll sign in my user first. So Dave, and then Dave test. Now I'm at the post list, and now say I go to the admin, it shouldn't ask me to log in. And yes, so our sign in page works as expected as well. So that's good. What if we, let me go ahead and log out here again, and then we'll pull up our app. And now what if we register a new user and see if they get logged in? So I'm going to say Jim, and I'm not sure what to put here. Let's say Rocket1234. Submit, and we got taken to the post list, so I think we're logged in as well. But Jim is not an admin user. We can't create an admin user from our registration page. So if I go to the admin page, it says, well, this is nice. We get a message. It says, you are authenticated as Jim, but you're not authorized to access this page because we know he's not an admin user. So I'll log in as Dave here. Dave test once again. I'll log in, and now we can probably verify that Jim is in the users table. Yes, and we'd added Tony in the last lesson. So we have Dave, Jim, and Tony all in our users, and everything is working as intended. The source code for today's tutorial starts where the previous lessons ended, and there's a link in the description that provides the code for each lesson. I've got VS Code open. Let's open a terminal window as we always do at the beginning of each lesson. I'm going to type source, then .venv/scripts/activate. Press enter, and that should start our virtual environment. Now we want to cd into the My Project directory, and we're ready to begin. Now, we've already created a user registration and login process, and today we want to provide authorization. That is, protect pages from anyone that is not logged in. And of course, to do that, we need to create a log out so we can test users that are logged in and test users that are logged out. I'm going to close the terminal window. Let's open the My Project directory here in the file tree. We want to go to users. We'll scroll down here to urls.py. Here we want to add a logout path as well. So I'm just going to click here on line 8, then press Shift Alt and the down arrow and copy that down. I'm going to double click on login and then press Control D to select login 2 more times. And then I'm going to type log out, and it should change all 3 of those instances. And now we have our logout path. Let's save this file and then go to the views.py file that's right underneath in the file tree. And now we need to create our logout view function. But to start with, we need to import logout at the top. Notice we're already importing login as we did in a previous lesson here on line 3. So right after that, I'll just put a comma and also import logout on that same line. Now I'm going to scroll down to the bottom where we can add this new logout function. So I'll say def logout_view, and it will also receive the request. Now here we also want to check if this is a post method. It would be really unusual to log out with a GET request. So we'll be submitting the logout through a form so we can use the post method. So here I want to say if request.method equals post, as we have before. Now we'll do something inside of this conditional. I'm going to say logout, and then I'm going to pass in the request. And then after that, I want to redirect to the post list, just like we did up here. So after we have logged out, I'll just copy this line on line 21 and paste it in here on line 29. With that change in place, we're ready to add our logout form. We want it to appear like a button in our nav bar, but it really needs to be a form to send this post request that we have here. So let's go ahead and go over to our file tree once again. And now the first thing I want to do is go to the static directory, because I'm going to add just a little bit more CSS to the style.css to style this form that we're about to put in. And of course, you can use your own CSS styles. This is not a CSS tutorial. I'm just pasting in some basic styles here for a logout class and a logout button. So I'll save that just to let you know the CSS has been updated in this tutorial for this specific purpose. Now, after that, let's go into templates where we have not that templates, I guess. We're in the users one there. We need the actual templates here in the root directory. So we have the layout.html that has our nav bar. I'm going to scroll down to the bottom of the nav bar here. I'm also going to press Alt-Z, so this wraps down to each line. And we want another line here. We'll put our form at the very end of the nav bar. So I'll put another pipe at the end of that link that we had for the login. And now we'll start here with a form element. And the class that we want to put on this is logout. And the action is going to be the URL that we set up for logout. So this is going to use our templating language. And now inside I'll have the %. And now we'll say users and a colon and logout, as that is what we have named that URL. And then after that, we also need to put in what method this will be. So this method is going to equal the post method. After we close that, we're going to have to close out our form also. Now, inside the form, as you remember the other forms we were submitting, we need that cross-site request forgery token. So I'm going to start typing CSRF, and there it comes up. I'll press Tab, and it puts that in the form for me. After that, we still need our button. So I'll start with a button element, and then it's going to have a class. And here, if I remember right, I made that class equal to logout-button. And after that, it's also going to have an aria-label because we're going to use an emoji on the button instead of words. So here I'll say this is a user logout. We could also give it a title attribute. And so I'll say title equals, and this would also be the user logout. And then we'll have whatever goes on the button itself, and then we'll close the button. So on the button, I'm going to put an emoji, and being a logout, I just want to wave goodbye. So I'm going to put the hand wave. And that's okay because we've already used the ARIA label to say what this means for screen readers. And if we mouse over, the title should help as well. And with these changes in place, let's save this file, and we should be able to test out our logout to make sure this much is working. So let's open a terminal up once again, and then I'm going to type manage.py and run server. That should start the web application running on port 8000. I'm going to press Control and click that URL, launch that in Chrome. Here's our application. Okay, let's see if we're logged in, and we can do that right now by trying to go to the admin page. So I'll put /admin, press enter. It says we need to log in. So we know we're not logged in at this point. Let's go ahead and log in. Now I am logged in. Let's go back to view the site, and everything looks okay here. Let's go ahead and click our log out button. It takes us to the post list as we expect. So did we log out? Well, for now, at least, we need to go back and check the admin page once again to see if we're logged in. No, we are logged out. So that much is working. And we're back in VS Code. Let's go ahead and close the terminal window. And now we need to create a page that we want to protect. In other words, we need to be logged in to be authorized to view that page. So I'm going to close these pages that we have open here in VS Code. I'm going to close the users app, and the templates directory as well. And let's go to the post directory, scroll down and go to urls.py. In the URL patterns, I want to put in another pattern to a page where we would create a new post, where we would allow users that are logged in to create a new post. But we have to be specific about where we put it here because of the slug. If we put it underneath the slug, this is going to catch whatever we put first and assume it's a slug. So we actually need to put this new line above the slug line. So Shift Alt and the down arrow to copy line 7 down to line 8. And now let's just change what we're going to put here. So I'm going to put in a path that is called new, there we go, dash post slash. And now here for the function, this could be different. We'll follow this same pattern that starts with posts. So I'll say posts underscore new, but then I'm going to name this once again new dash post. So the views here has a function that is following the naming pattern of the other functions that starts with posts. Other than that, I'm using new dash post, and I've also given the URL the name of new dash post here. Okay, let's save this, and now let's go to views.py to create that new function as well. I'm going to scroll a little bit, and then we'll start that with def, and then we had post underscore new, and this will also receive the request. Oh, and I said post. Let's look at these others. I actually meant posts as I followed that pattern. Let's go back and double check that here. So here it says posts, and that's what I want. Here we had post page, so I guess we could name it either way if we were switching between plural and singular. And since it's a single post, let's switch this to post underscore new, and I'll come back and just change this back to post underscore new as we did for the post page function as well. Okay, a simple function right here. So we want to return and render as we have in other functions, and we'll pass in the request, and then we want posts slash post underscore new dot HTML. So that is our template, but we haven't created our template yet. So with that in mind, let's save this file, and now let's go to the templates here inside of the posts app. And then inside of this post directory, we see a couple of templates already, so we want to create one more and call it post underscore new. So I'll create a new file, and it is post underscore new dot HTML. Now let's just look at the post page that we have here. A very simple page overall, and right now we're going to have an even simpler page for our post new just to start out. So Control A to select everything, Control C to copy everything. Now I'll click into our new file and Control V as in Virginia to paste everything. So here is our new page. And I'm just going to change a couple of things that we have here. One is I'm going to delete everything inside of the content block. Instead, I'm just going to put an H1 and say new post. And then up here in the block title, I'm essentially going to say the same thing. It's just a new post page. And now that I think about this page for just a moment, just to keep the same styling, if we go back and look at this post page here, we have a section. Our post list has a section, so let's just keep that same pattern as well. So I'm going to put a section element back here just to be consistent. I'll copy this closing tag, Control X, Control V to paste underneath. When I save, it does not auto format, so I'll just tab it over. There we go. And now I'm finished with this template just for the time being. And with that saved, let's close the posts app directory over here in the file tree, and we're ready to go back to our templates where we have the layout because we need to add a link to this new post page. Now this is going to be a link, so let's just put it before the form that has our logout. So I'm going to copy this, and then, or not copy, I'm going to highlight, and then I'm going to press Shift Alt and the down arrow, and that will copy it down to the next line. So we can just change a couple of things here. So our URL is going to go to posts, and then the exact page is going to be new dash post. I'm also going to press Alt Z once again so we can see everything on the page. And now this says user login. So I can highlight that and then press Control D to select the next one as well. And instead, let's type new post. And now we want a different emoji for the new post. So I'll delete that, And once again, you don't have to use emojis. You can use anything you want. So I'm going to type new, and there's an emoji that says new as well. So that's what I'll use for our new post link emoji. But as this is right now, anybody could still click this link and view that new post page. And we want to protect the page. So now let's go to the Posts app. And inside the Posts app, we want to go to the views.py file. Now let's scroll up to the top of the file because we have another import here. So I'm going to say from django.contrib.auth.decorator. So we're going to use a decorator on our function. Then we'll say import login underscore required. Now to use a decorator, we put it directly above the function in this file. So here we start with the @ symbol, and then we'll have login underscore required. Now we pass something here to this login required function, or decorator, if you will. So I'm going to say login underscore URL equals, and you can see it wants to complete that for me. Then we're just going to send whoever needs to go there to the users/login page where we have our login page. So what does this do exactly? Well, this checks when this function runs to see if the user is logged in. And if they're not logged in, it redirects them to this login URL that we have provided. So with this much in place, let's go back to Chrome and test everything out. Let's see if we're currently logged in. I don't think we are. No, we are not. So that should let us go back to our main site here. I'll just delete the rest out of that URL. We're back here on the main page. Here is our icon or our emoji to go to the new page. So I'm going to click that. Let's see if it redirects us to the login page. It sure does. So let me go ahead and log in. And now that I'm logged in, it took me to the post list as we expected after we logged in, but let's see if I can access that new post page. And now I can access it because I'm logged in. So this also works as expected. Now let me go ahead and log out one more time here and verify that I'm logged out. When I click new, yes, I went back to the user login. So now we're ready to continue. There's one more thing I want to highlight before we go back to VS Code. I'm going to click the new emoji one more time to try to go to that page. And when I get redirected to the login, notice in the URL, I now have a param here called next because it's saying after I log in, I likely want to go back to that new post page that I tried to access. But we know right now when I log in, I get taken to the posts list. Well, let's change this. So if I tried to go to the new post page and I was redirected to the login after I log in, it should take me back to that new post page. And I'm back in VS Code. Once again, to avoid any confusion, I'm going to close out of all the files that we currently have open. And let's close the Posts app as well as the templates directory here. And now we're ready. Let's go to the Users app and then Templates, and then of course inside of Users. And now let's go to the login.html template. I'm going to scroll up just a little, press Alt-Z so we can see everything on the page. But what we want to do is add something here underneath the form. We're going to put a hidden input where we can gather that next page value if it exists in the URL. So let's start with our templating language, a curly bracket, parent sign, and then we'll say if request.get.next, because that is a GET request that shows that param in the URL. So then we're getting the next param value from that. So if that exists is what we're checking right now. And if after we check that, this input will only be added if it exists. So then we'll say input will be a type equals hidden. And then after that, let's give this a name equal to next. And then let's set the value. And now we'll use two curly brackets and say request.get.next. So whatever page that we were going to go to that it sets in that URL, now we have the value here. And that's what we have in this input. So it will get passed on when the form is submitted if it exists. And of course, after we do this, we need to end our if statement as well. I need lowercase there. And with that change in place, we can save And then we need to go to the views.py down here at the bottom, still in the user's app. And now we need to modify our login view function because the post request might be sending in that next value as well. Right now, when we log in, no matter what, we get sent to the post list, but we need to conditionally check. And if we have that next value, we want to go there instead of the post list. So let's add a little code between the login function and the current return redirect that we have. Here I can say if next in request.post, and then underneath that we'll have return, I need lowercase here, return redirect. Now where do we want to go instead of the post list? Well, we want to go to wherever we were being sent. I actually don't need quotes. I want request, lowercase again, request dot post, uppercase, the get method. So I'm getting the value of the field we named next in that form, that hidden input. So if that existed, and here I could change these to lowercase or to single quotes also just to match. So I know I've mixed them in there some. I try to be consistent, but here we go. So if next in request.post, then we're going to return whatever the value we had in that next field. And remember, we named that field next as well. And of course, if that doesn't happen, we need our else here, and then we need to tab this in to conform. So if next doesn't exist, we're going to just log in and go to the post list. Now let's check all of this out in Chrome once again. So I'll pull the browser back up, and if I remember right, we are logged out. We're already on the user login page actually, and it has the next value up here. So if I refresh that, we should still be good. Now let me go ahead and log in and see if we get redirected back to the new post page instead of getting sent to the post list. And yes, we did. That's great. So now let me log out once again, and I'll just go to the home page and sign in. So I'm not going to the new post page. Now after I log in, I should be redirected to the post list instead of the new post page. And that's what happens as well. So this also works as we want it to. Now, before we finish today, one other thing we can do is conditionally show some of the options in the nav bar. Right now we're showing everything. So I'm signed out, but I'm still showing the sign out link. And I'm also still showing the new post page, even though I shouldn't be authorized to view that new post page. So we should only show these if we're signed in. Likewise, the user registration and sign in should probably only show if we're logged out. So let's make those changes. I'm back in VS Code. Let's close these files and let's go ahead and close the users app over here. We need to open the templates directory. Once again, go to the layout.html template where we have our nav bar. Now in templates, we have access to the user object, so we can check that. So before the new post and then our form that lets us log out, let's go ahead and put in a conditional check here, and I'll start using the templating language once again with curly brackets, percent signs. Now I'll say if user, so this is the user object that I can access, and then I can say dot is underscore authenticated. So we're just checking to see if the user is logged in. That's the only time that I want to show the new post link and the link to log out. So both of those emojis. So I'll tab those over. Now after that, I can put an else here, and then we'll say else, and of course have our parent signs and curly brackets. Now we'll put whatever we want to do here if the user is not logged in, and then we'll have end if. Well, what do we want to put if the user is not logged in? That would be the user registration and the user login. So let's copy both of those, starting line 26 down to 31. Control X to cut those. We'll get rid of that empty line. Now I'm going to paste them here on line 35. And I want to get rid of this last pipe symbol here because now the login will be the last thing to show in the list if we're not logged in. All right, let's go back to Chrome and make sure it's all working. I'll reload, and yes, so I'm not logged in, so now I have the login link and the user registration link here. So let me go ahead and log in, and we'll see if the nav bar changes. Got Dave test. Now I'm logged in. Those disappeared, and now we have the link to the new post page and the log out as well. So everything is working as expected. The source code for today's tutorial starts where the previous lesson ended, and there's a link in the description that provides the code for each lesson. We've got Visual Studio Code open. Let's go ahead and open a terminal window as we always do, and then we'll type source, then .venv/scripts/activate. Press enter. That should activate our virtual environment. Now let's cd into the My Project folder. And we're ready to begin. Today we'll create a custom form that will add new posts to our application. So let's go ahead and close the terminal. Let's open the My Project directory in the file tree and then the post directory. Now inside this directory we could click on, let's say, views, but we want to create a new file. So I'll click that icon and I'll name this forms.py. So we're not creating this completely from scratch because Django does provide a little bit of information for us. So let's start out with an import, and I'll say from Django import forms. Now after that, we also want to say from dot, which means just in the folder that we're in, we want to import models. So this refers to the models folder that we have over here in the file tree. And you can see we have a post class. So this is the model we will be working with. Let's go back to forms.py now and come down a couple of lines. So now let's create a new class. I'll say class, and then we'll call this create post. And now this receives forms.model form. And after that, we'll put a colon. And then we're going to have a nested class inside. Now this name is important. We can't just make up whatever name we want. We need to call this meta with a capital M. Now inside this class, we're going to say the model equals our models.post. That's what we had in our models file over here. So that's what we're setting this model equal to. And after that, we'll say fields. And now we need to specify the fields that we want to inside of this list. So let's look at our models. And really, we want the title, body, slug, and the banner. We don't need the date because that will be added automatically as we have auto now add true here also. So we want those other four fields. So we'll put each one of those in our list here. So title, then we had body, then we had slug, and then we had banner. And I put an extra space here out of habit, but I just want to be consistent. So I'll remove that space. And that's all we need here to create our new form. So now let's move on and we'll go to the views.py inside of the post directory. And now we'll have one additional import at the top. So just under our last import, we'll say from dot, and then we will import forms. So that's the file that we had just created with our new form in it. And now let's scroll down to our posts new function that we have here on line 18, and we'll just add to that. So inside of the function on the first line, we'll say form equals forms dot create post, and we'll put the parentheses after that to call it. And now that we have the form, we want to pass it to our render along with the request and the path that we have here. So in this final part of the function that we call, we'll put in form, and of course this is going to be the form. So much like we had here above with post, we're just doing the same thing with form inside of our post new. And now this is going to our posts_new.html template that we see right here on line 20 now. So let's go to the templates and let's look at the template we had for post_new. And right now we just have an H1. So we need to add the form that will be now available to this template. Let's add a line below our H1 and we'll start with the form element. Then I want to put a class on this, and we'll use the same class that we did on our user form. So it's form with validation, and this refers to the CSS that we've created. And of course, you can create your own CSS if you want to. After that, we're going to have an action, and let's set this just to empty right now. And after that, we're going to have a method. We'll set this equal to post. And then there's one more thing. I'll press Alt-Z to wrap this down. And that is we might submit an image, our banner. So we need to put enc type. We'll set that equal to multipart/form-data. Now this isn't specific to Django. This is just something in HTML overall when you're sending something that's not just a typical form submission with text. So we're submitting an image. This would be required in any form that we would do that with. And after that, of course, we want to have the closing form tag as well to close that out. Now let's talk about the action up here, and we can use our template. So we can put in a curly bracket, a %, say it's a URL. Now we can refer to posts, and then we want to put new dash post because that's what we had named that, and then of course the closing %. Now let's go ahead and save this, and just to see what I'm talking about, if we go down in the urls.py here, you can see the name that we have for the named URL is new dash post, and the name of the app is post. So we're going to post and then new dash post. So if we come back up to our template now, we can see how we're referencing that in the URL. It's posts and then new dash post. And now we need the contents of the form, which it isn't much, but we'll start off with our cross-site request forgery token. So I'll start typing CSRF, and there it is. I'll press tab, and it adds it to the body here of the form, or inside the form at least. Now I can use our templating language again and pass in the form itself, and that's what we were passing from our function that we had before. So now we're using the form here. We also need a submit button. So we can just make this a button. When there's only one button in a form, it defaults to the type submit. So there is no confusion when we only have this one button. So I can just put a button here, but I also want to put a class on this button. And if I remember correctly, it is the class form, if I have my fingers on the right keys, form-submit. And then I'm just going to put add post on the button and close this out, and this will submit the form. Hey guys, I hope you're enjoying the video. You may be surprised to learn that 3 out of every 4 viewers, nearly 75% of all people who watch my channel, aren't subscribed. So I just wanted to take a quick second and remind you to hit that subscribe button. It really helps me out. And if you really like my videos, you can get exclusive content and support my channel even more by joining my Patreon at patreon.com/DaveGray. Thanks for your consideration, and now back to the video. Now, if we submit the form right now, we can't expect anything, but let's at least see what it looks like. So let's go ahead and open up our terminal window once again, and now we'll type py, manage.py, and run server. That should start our application up. There it is on IP address 127.0.0.1, which is the same as localhost, and then it's port 8000. I'll hold down Control, click there. So here we have our application. It looks like I need to log in. Remember from the last lesson, we can't even go to the new post page or new post form now without logging in. So I'm going to click the login, type Dave, and then I had Dave test. I'm now logged in, and now I see the new icon up here, the new emoji. I'll click that, and here is our form. So we've got the title, the body, the slug, and the banner, and then the add post button. Now, one note here, I did modify the CSS from the last lesson just to put a max width on the form of about 600 pixels. You can do whatever you want with your CSS. I'm just letting you know I made a small change if you had the code from the last lesson. So if we put anything in here right now, it won't do anything, but we just wanted to verify that the form did look as we expect it to, and it currently does. Back in VS Code, let's go ahead and close the terminal window, and now we want to scroll down to the views.py file. We're going to add some more logic to our post_new function. Now, as is, we currently receive the empty form that we create, and it is passed on to the template right here. So we need to handle this logic much like we did the user logic, because this should be a post request, so we're first going to check for that. So we'll say if request.method equals with 2 equal signs and then capital post. So we're now inside an if statement. Let's handle the else first, because the else would be it's a GET request, and that gives us the empty form that we start with. So let's create an extra line and just say else. And now this would create the form. So we'll just indent that so Python's good. We still have a red squiggly here because we don't have anything up here in the first part of the if. But the else is a GET request, so then the form is created, and then the return with the render function will send that empty form when we first go to the page. So now what about the post method? So let's handle that. We'll start off with form is going to equal forms.create create post, but now we're going to pass in the request.post that we receive. We're also going to pass in request.files, and that's something you hadn't seen before, but we are sending an image file, so we also need that now. And now, as you might remember from our logic with the users, here we can validate what was submitted against the model. So we can say if form.is_valid, and we call that function, then we can do something if it is valid. If it's not valid, it's just going to come down here and return the form, and that form will have the validation, essentially showing us what is wrong. So if it is valid, let me put a hashtag here, and I'll want to say save, and we're not just going to save the new post, we're actually going to assign a user. So I'll say save with user, but then after that, I'm going to return, and we could redirect anywhere we want to. I'm going to redirect back to the posts and then the named URL list. So looks like we need to import redirect up here at the top, and that comes after render on the same line. So now we've got redirect, and yes, that looks good. So we've got this much, and now we'll be able to submit the form, actually get some validation on it if it's not correct. If it is correct, it's not going to save anything, but it will redirect us to the post list. So I'm back in the browser now. Let's go ahead and refresh our form, and let's do a test post. Now, again, it will not save the post, but if there is no error, we will get redirected to the post list. So I'm just going to say test post. This is a test post. Say test-post for the slug. Let's choose a file to add to this, and I'm going to choose my ready to go image, and everything looks good here. Let's click add post. And it looks like it went as expected. So we see the other posts we had in our list. Now at this point, we're going to change our model because we want to assign a user before we save the post. And if you remember, that takes a couple of steps. It's also going to cause a problem with these posts. So let's go into our admin, say admin/. Now I'm logged in as the admin user. If you aren't, you need to remember your username and log in. Then log in, and you'll see the admin dashboard after you log in as an admin. So now let's go to the posts, and let's click up here in the top check mark, and it should select all the posts. And then you can choose an action. I'm going to say delete selected posts. I'm just going to delete all of the posts we had. So I'll click go. It'll ask me if I'm sure, and I'll say yes. Now all those posts are gone. If we go back to the site, we shouldn't see any posts on the post list. Back in VS Code, let's go to the models.py file in the post directory. Here we're going to want to add an author for our posts, and the author is going to be the user that's logged in. So let's import the user. We'll say from Django, if I could spell Django.contrib.auth.models, we want to import user with a capital U. After that, we're going to assign an author for our posts. So let's create an extra line here. We'll say author equals. Now this is going to make more sense if you have worked with a relational database before. If not, I'll quickly try to explain how this works. But you have more than one table in your database. So here we have a user table, and we have a table that stores the posts. And now these two tables will be related to each other because one user could create many posts, so it will need to link to that user every time he creates or she creates a post. So the author is going to be a foreign key in the post table. And if that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, the more you learn about databases, it will. But just for now, know they're related and they are linked, and we're going to call it a foreign key. So I have models dot foreign key, then I'm going to pass in the user, and now I have an on_delete that is required. We'll set this equal to models.cascade. There we see it at the top. And after that, we'll say the default is equal to none. Now that shouldn't happen because we're always going to have a logged in user or a new post can't be created, but we can leave that default in there anyway. This onDelete, though, is required, and that's telling the database how to handle your data if this relationship is deleted. And cascade means, okay, if this user gets deleted out of the user table, it's going to delete all of their posts out of the post table too, so it doesn't have a broken relationship. And with this change, we can save our model. And now for a mini student challenge. Do you remember what we need to do after we change our model? There's a couple of steps we need to take before we can do anything else. If you remember what that is, go ahead and pause the video and apply those changes. Okay, I'm back and I hope you did well. Here's what we need to do. We need to make migration. So I'm going to Control-C to exit the server so it's not running now. And now I'm going to say py manage.py and then make migrations, because anytime you change a model, you then need to make migrations and migrate those changes to the database. So we'll go ahead and press enter here after make migrations. Now it's applied those. Now we'll say py manage.py and then migrate. Now it will apply that migration and now we can run our server. So py manage.py run server and everything is back up and running with the new changes. Okay, I'm anxious to make some new posts and see the authors for those posts. And to do that, let's close the terminal and let's apply how we're going to see those authors first. In the post list, so the template in posts, that is posts_list, let's come down to the line that has the date. And so now we'll have the title above and then we'll have the post date. And after that, I'm going to put by. Then I'll use a couple of curly brackets and I'll say post.author because we should now have an author field, and close that with a couple of curly brackets. So we should see the date and then by and then the author in the post list so we can identify who wrote which post. Now I almost forgot, but we need to go back and let's apply what we have here in the function so we can actually save the post with the user. So now we can remove this comment that we have and let's start with new post. And this is going to equal our form.save. Now we've seen this before, but here's something you haven't seen yet. We'll say commit equals false, and you need a capital F on that false as well. Then after that, we have an instance of our new post. So then we'll say new post.author. And this is going to equal the request.user because the request has the user that is logged in. And then we're going to say new post.save, and that will save our new post. With those changes, let's go back to the browser. I'm back in the browser and I'm logged in as Dave. So I'll click home just to make sure everything's working as expected. Now I'll click the new icon. And let's create our test post, and this time it should save. So we'll say test post in the body as well, test-post for the slug. Choose an image, and I'll choose the beach chair, and I'll click add post. And now we have our test post in the post list, and it gives the date, and it says by Dave, and there's the body. We can go to the page also. Hey, it looks great. Let me sign out now. And I'm going to register a new user. So I'll register here and I'm going to say this username is Mike. And then I'll say Mike test for the password, Mike test. Submit. Okay, now we have our new user, Mike. Let's create a new post from Mike. So we'll call this Mike's post. Mike made a post, Mike-post. We'll choose, let's not choose a file, let's use the fallback. Remember, we get a fallback if we don't choose an image, so we'll just not choose one this time. Add the post. Now we have a new post from Mike in our post list also, and we can see who wrote each post in the post list. I can click that, and the fallback image did apply to Mike's post. So everything works as expected. So congratulations, you have a complete working blog app that you built with Django. And you have made it through the series. Now, I do have one section left in this video where I want to make a couple of updates and changes. And we're back in VS Code. Just a few updates and changes I want to make specifically to the project settings file. Received a little feedback while making this series, and there's a couple of changes that I provided that were actually kind of the old way of doing things, although there's nothing wrong with them and the application is working, it's not broken. I just want to give the updates. So let's go to the My Project directory and the settings.py file. These changes are also going to help you deploy your application if you get ready to deploy it. There's some changes you have to make for static files, for example. So let's go through this. I'm going to scroll down here on line 12. We no longer need to import OS, so we can remove that. which will cause us to make some other changes as well. Let's scroll down a little further. Note here on line 25, it says debug equals true, and this is a security warning. Don't run with debug turned on in production. So if you're going to deploy, in other words, let's make this false. This way, we also need to specify allowed host. Now, you may still run this in your development environment on your local host. So inside of here, let's go ahead and put local host. Let's also put in that IP address you've been seeing, 127.0.0.1, which means the same thing as local host. So we've got both of those in the allowed host now. Now we can scroll down, way down to the bottom of the file where we had defined some things before and we had actually used that OS import. Now you can see VS Code, since we deleted that import, has highlighted where we were using it. So let's go ahead and move our media URL. I'll Control X to cut that, and I'll put it right under the static URL. We're just kind of organizing the URLs together. We have this static files directories, and we're going to change that here in just a second. We also have this media root that we're going to change. I'm going to Control X that, put it under these other two, and above this, I also want to create a static underscore root. Now let's set the static root equal to base underscore directory slash, and let's call this folder, we could name it whatever we want to. I'll call it assets. That seems to make sense. They're things that we are going to use. Now, as you see, I just used the base directory without the OS import here. So we can delete this os.path.join, just use the base directory here, delete the comma, put a slash, delete the other parentheses, and it works just like that now. So as you might guess, we can do the same thing here inside of the static files directory. So I'll delete all of this, and I'll delete the comma, I'll put a slash, and I'll delete that ending parenthesis as well. And now to show how this new assets directory is going to work, I'll delete a couple of these lines while I'm here as well, but let's open up a terminal window. And now I can type clear, so nothing else is there that's confusing. I want to type py manage.py and then collect stat, I need to spell that right, collect static. And this is going to collect all of the static assets, and you'll notice it grabs a lot of the static assets for the Django admin area that we've been visiting as well, and it will put them all in that assets directory. So I'm going to press enter, let it collect all of that, and now we'll see that over here. If I close the terminal window, we have this assets directory. Inside now there's an admin folder, and there's a lot of things here that we didn't create, but they are static assets that Django provides. Then it also grabbed our CSS and JS that we had provided. Okay, let's save the changes in our settings file, and now let's go to the urls.py file as well. Now I want to scroll down, and just under this last import, we want to add one more import, and it's going to be from django.views.static, and not another dot after that, just static. Then we say import serve. So we are importing the serve function here. Now this actually gets used during development as well, and that's okay. It's just another way of doing things. So we're going to make a change here. So we'll scroll down to our URL patterns. Notice we have this URL patterns with the plus equals, and it sets our static files. We can comment that out, or you could delete it. If you want to just comment it out so you can refer to it, that's fine too. Now we're also going to have another import here at the top. I need to scroll back up where we import path and include. We also want to import re_path, and re stands for regular expression because we can use regular expressions here in our patterns. So now instead of the pattern that we commented out here below, I'm going to paste a couple in, and you can see what they look like. I'll press Alt-Z as well. So these are regular expression patterns here. So we're defining a group. Here's the one for media, and here's the one for static. If you're not familiar with regular expressions, there's really a lot to learn there. If you are, sometimes they can still be confusing, and I usually paste them into something like ChatGPT to say, what exactly is this doing if I don't understand what it's doing? But here you can see it's matching the media path, This one is matching the static path. It's using that serve function that we imported here, and then specifying the document root where we specified the settings and those values that we just set in the settings file. And finally, the last fix I have is just from when we were working with the users templates. So I'll come down here into the users, and we'll go into the templates and use the login. And here, I just specified the file path /users/login, which we could really use our templating language. So we could say URL, and it was users:\login, and of course another % there. And then it would be the same when we do that on register. So I'll change this one here as well. So curly brace, %URL, users, register, a %, and Alt-Z to wrap that down. So I've made those changes, and we could of course verify those in the URLs that we had one named register and one named login. So here we made the correct name, users login and users register. Of course, in the URLs we also see the app name is users. Once again, guys, congratulations on completing the Django series. You have a working blog application. If you choose to deploy this application, there are different ways to do it, and you can visit the various hosts for different instructions or Google, because it's a little different for each one. So I didn't include that in this video, but there are step-by-step instructions in many different blogs and articles out there for deploying a Django application. Congratulations on completing the Django for Beginners tutorial series. Hey guys, giving a quick shout out to my patrons. Holy Coder is a progress provider, and Eldad is a member at the senior level. Also, thank you to all of the junior members. You're all helping me reach my goals. And if you haven't checked out my Patreon, it's got exclusive content and early release content. And it's not one of those Patreons that doesn't get many posts. I'm active on there every week, so please check it out if you haven't. Remember to keep striving for progress over perfection. And a little progress every day will go a very long way. Please give this video a like if it's helped you. And thank you for watching and subscribing. You're helping my channel grow. Have a great day, and let's write more code together very soon.